Um, right, a little bit about me. I live in California, San Francisco Bay Area of California. I'm in my mid-20s. I work for a tech company. I went to university in England. I lived in England for 3 years. I was born and raised in California, though. A lot of people say I have some kind of a English accent, but
I don't hear it personally.
Well, it's been a few years now since I left England and came back to the mother country. So, on a little bit about my politics, I lean very heavily libertarian. I'm kind of a half-hearted anarchist, as a matter of fact. The more I read about anarcho-capitalism, the more I'm intrigued by it. Still skeptical about a few points, namely around collective defense. And then a position that I would hold. What'd you say? A position I'd hold that no one else would, or
Yeah, you don't have to come up with one, but I just thought it might be interesting.
Oh, actually, a good one would be. I think we should have a federalized immigration policy. So the federal government shouldn't set immigration laws. It should be up to the 50 states. Where if Iowa wants to have merit-based immigration and Nebraska wants to have no immigration, then they could each have their own separate immigration policies, and it would be up to Nebraska taxpayers to pay for the enforcement of their state's immigration policy.
Okay, so not like a standard federal law, but like different state laws, and each state
Right.
would kind of mandate their own input and output of, I guess, people.
Yeah, it's an idea which is not many other people have even voiced it. I'm not going to claim it's original to me. I'm sure there have been other smarter people who have come up with this idea, but I just thought, this is something which I think would take a lot of the vitriol out of the immigration debate at the national.
Yeah, I think that it might be interesting. We could maybe flesh into that later.
Yeah, we could save it for later.
Anything else you wanted to say before I switch over?
No, I think that sums up everything about me that's relevant, anyway.
So for myself, as far as economics, I classify myself as like a mixed marketeer. I'm in my early 30s. I'm married, as some people know, who've hung out with me on Twitch. And as far as hobbies, like I've always loved streaming on Twitch. I'm the first person, I think, to stream Minecraft. I still have the VOD saved. You guys can go check. So streaming has always been really fun. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people who, if they don't find it fun, like they'll probably drop off. So you kind of have to enjoy it to do it. And outside of that, so something maybe unique that I hold that others don't hold. I think a lot of people don't know about ensoulment and like quickening when it relates to the abortion discussion, and I think that that's an interesting area for people to discuss. So basically, like if you define the moment a human is created by the moment, I guess, that they get a soul, like it would be completely metaphysical, right? Then that's ironically what we talked about for like 1,000+ years, and then that was lost somewhere along the line. So it's fun to read about it like in old books and papers, but like it's completely devoid of any conversation nowadays. So I think that that's something.
How far back would you have to go to find people talking about it? Like, when did this disappear? Around what time?
I think the earliest discussion of it was like either Aristotle or Plato, where they defined like the point of ensoulment as like a certain number of days from birth. I can pull up. There's an academic paper I got actually that was published in England. I can try to pull up the exact number of days it was, but yeah, it goes back to like the Greeks, which is absurd. And that idea was fairly similar and held for quite a while. The biggest change, I guess, came with like Pope Pius. But anyway, I'm not Catholic or anything. I'm just
Me neither.
Yeah. So I'm also in California, by the way. So you're in NorCal. I'm in SoCal.
Reflecting the very real divide between Southern California.
So you're in tech. I'm in the immunology field, essentially. I'm fascinated with that. Oh yeah. I mean it. So that's a whole. I mean, we're talking about economics, but that's tough because like, how do you ascribe value to like the arts? That's quite difficult.
Yeah, indeed.
So, since you are the guest, if you want to go first, you can also bring up an issue first for us to discuss. If not, I have a few ready to go. Just two off the top of my head I remember when we were talking, I was like, this is something I have to discuss. So, for the purpose of the discussion, I will be immortal. What should I refer to you as? Mr. I'm sorry, will not work.
No, I was joking earlier. You could call me Mr. Libertarian, but now you can just call me Paperback.
All right, cool.
Short for Paperback Writer.
Okay, so I think what I really liked, what I read about like the stuff that you put, is a lot of people don't research the numbers, and you're actually very good with the numbers. So this, unlike most people I talk with, it surprised me when you stumbled on something that's pretty black and white. Like you knew with entitlement spending what a large portion of the budget that it takes up. You know a lot of things, I would say, that like most Americans don't know. But where me and you had like a clear black and white difference was had to do with deficits, right? So I claim that one party is more responsible for our deficit spending, and you talked about the debt, and I said no, like let's leave the debt alone for now. I agree with you that both parties have ran up the debt. That's incontrovertible, but I feel one party runs up deficits even more. And I think that's significant, and we can kind of go into that. But like before I get into it, like I don't want to. I want to make sure I Iron Man your position. Like,
sure,
you do agree that both parties are equally at fault for deficits, or is one party more at fault for deficits?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this. I would. So I don't. It's difficult to say are both parties equally to blame, because it's like, how do we determine? Are they perfectly equal?
Well, no, not 50, but I mean like significantly different.
So obviously we're not talking about like, okay, we can scientifically determine that yes, both parties are exactly 50-50 to blame.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that either.
Just saying, it's in the general ballpark of 50-50. I could say, okay, yes, I would say that both parties are about equally to blame. Maybe one is, an extra 5% at most responsible for the high deficits and the accruing debt. But for the most part, I would say that certainly as an ongoing issue, both parties are equally to blame in the present moment.
Okay.
Historically, and I would make another point there that we should separate two things: the historical accrual of debt and then the ongoing deficit spending.
We'll get to that, but I didn't mischaracterize your position. Like we're the foundation that we're on, we can kind of start from there, right?
Yeah, I would agree that.
Okay.
That's fairly characterizing my argument.
Okay, so I would say let's just take a historical view of it, right? So this is just a numbers question. Let's look at the deficits of each president. We're not going to go back to the first, right? That doesn't make sense. But I think if we want, we can go back like 50 so years. So I
think a very obvious starting point would be the end of World War II, because I think we can both agree that World War II and Great Depression before, that was an aberration.
I was going to start in like 75 personally. I was going to start with Gerald Ford, and then I was going to move forward. So,
well, I mean,
do you want me to start with Jimmy Carter?
Be completely opposed to that, but we've got to talk about the insertion of Medicare, Medicaid into the federal budget, which entered in the 60s.
So I know, but I mean, with Gerald Ford, we're talking late 70s, right? So Gerald Ford's first budget's 75. So if you want, I'll skip Gerald altogether. We'll start with Jimmy Carter. Is that cool? Jimmy 78, right? Okay, cool. So let's.
Carter was elected in 76, took office in 77.
Yes. So, and his first attempt at a budget was 78. So, fiscal year 1978. I'm just going to go through these. Obviously, a Democrat for anyone who may be watching this later, and isn't sure. So, his first budget, fiscal year 78, was $59 billion. So there we have our starting point, right? Now, the following year, he still has a deficit, right? So that means the debt is still going up. It's like a credit card that you're getting for anyone who's interested, and kind of having trouble following along, you're getting extra spending that you're not able to get back in revenue internally into the government. So when your expenses exceed your revenue, you end up with deficits, right? When your revenue exceeds your expenses, you end up with surpluses. And if they're exactly even, you get nothing. Like it's a wash, right? So 59.
That never happens.
Yeah, yeah, that would be like crazy hard, given all the money that we're working with. Okay, cool. So there's 59. Then 79 comes, 41 billion. Okay, so he lowered it a tad, but then boom, it jumps back up to 74, 79. So we can say between 60 and 80 billion is his range. It's a little bit weird, right? But it's not huge. It's not like he doubled, tripled it, right? Okay, so that's kind of what Jimmy Carter did. Now we go to Reagan, right? So Jimmy Carter's 81 budget was 79 billion. Immediately with Reagan, it becomes 128 billion. So that's almost doubling the deficit. So if we had to keep track of points, which I can do if we'd like. Sorry, I'm just gonna make a little note here. So I'm gonna deduct a point right there from Reagan for doubling the deficit. And would you say that that's not fair?
Keep going.
Gotcha.
I mean, I want to see where you're going with this.
Well, I mean, that was one doubling, right? So then let's go to his next budget, this fiscal year 1983. That's 208 billion. So almost another doubling of the deficit. This is significant, right? Like Jimmy Carter never doubled the deficit, and up until now, Reagan's already doubled it twice. So okay, that's 83. I would put another strike against him. Okay, so then now we're going to go to 84, 185. So he lowers a little bit, which is good. 84, 85. So 185 billion for 84, 212 billion for 85, 221. So it's getting kind of stable, right? And then what's great is 87 comes along and it goes to 150 billion. So that's great. So he's able to, in that instance, wipe off 70 billion of spending. So that's good. He's making some progress there. And then it just holds. It goes 155 for 88. And 153 for 89. Okay, cool. All right, so George W. Bush comes in, 1990. So it goes from 153 to 221 billion. That is quite significant, right? So right there you have almost a 30% jump in deficit spending.
And this was 93?
This is 1990, George H.W. Bush. So I would immediately give a point there. Like, why is in his first year? I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. You're a brand new president. You've just come to power, and one of the ways you can kind of increase your esteem is you spend more, right? Like more programs allows you more flexibility to do things, right? But I think fairly by increasing it by a third there. He didn't have to go from 153 to 221. Like that was quite significant. The amount increase, by the way, was the equivalent of Jimmy Carter's whole deficit. So
technical question: are these numbers adjusted for inflation? Are they in constant dollars, or are they nominal?
No. All of these are not adjusted. So, but I mean, from 1990 to Jimmy Carter's 81 was 9 years. So inflation is there, but it's not that significant, right? If you count a 2% inflation rate.
I mean, there's different ways of counting inflation, of course, but
I mean, just CPI.
The inflation rate. The inflation rate from 1976 to 1981 was 100%. So
no, but yeah, we're not even in that range though. Remember, we skipped Gerald. Yeah, so we didn't. That outlier didn't even get captured in our data set.
I just want to point out that inflation is something you do have to take into account.
I'm not saying it's insignificant. I'm just saying, like, in this instance, the one that I pointed to, it's not. So okay, so that's 1990. What happens in 1991? So it goes to 269. So that's not terrible. It's only like 50 billion, but it's getting there. But then 1992, he goes to 290. So in the span of 2 years, he's increased the deficit 70 billion, and then he already increased it from Reagan 70 billion. So he's done a swing of 140 billion in deficit spending. And so I would, again, for the 1992 fiscal year budget, I would put another point against him because he didn't need to do that 140 billion swing. It's quite significant, and I don't see any like existential threat maybe that might have like prompted it in like 1992. Like if anything, the 90s were a great time for economics, right?
Well, I mean, we did have a very sharp recession in 1992. It's widely blamed for Bill Clinton. You know, it's the economy, stupid, right? Bill Clinton managed to beat George H.W. Bush in large part because of the recession. But you're right in saying the 90s were, generally speaking, a time of peace, stability, prosperity.
Okay. All right. So now it's Bill's time to go at it. George H.W. Bush's his last budget was 255, and so Bill's first year. If you've seen kind of the trend, every president seems to spend more in their first year. Ironically, Bill's able to spend less, so he cuts about 50 billion. So he goes from 255 from fiscal year 93 to 203. So that's good, right? And then so let's see what happens the following year. So 95 revenues are really good. Goes to 164, 96 goes to 107, 97 goes to 22, and then as everyone knows famously, because this almost never happens for the federal government, we end up having surpluses. So for 98 we have a surplus of 69 billion, 99 we have a surplus of 126 billion, which 126 billion is almost, George H.W. Bush's like full budget. Like it's quite significant. 2000 is a $236 billion surplus, which is essentially the 1993 last budget that George H.W. Bush put. And then finally in 2001 we end with a $128 billion surplus. Both of us were alive then. I remember watching videos and discussions where people were talking about how surpluses could go on, for the next decade, given how good we were doing financially, which was hilarious given what actually happened.
In hindsight, yeah. Hilarious in hindsight.
So, if anything, I would give a positive point there. It's tough to say it's all Clinton because it's not. There was so much that happened that he didn't control. But if anyone were to say that, yeah, but if anyone were to say like, he was a reckless spender, I would say that wouldn't hold up, obviously, right?
No, I wouldn't say that Bill Clinton was a reckless spender.
Okay. And I think me and you agree. There was a lot of things happening that he didn't really like.
Room, I would say that George W. Bush was a reckless spender.
Yeah, I think from everything from our discussions, I think you readily admit that, and a bunch of other things. Like I think you
it's inherent, implicit in the contention that both parties are to blame is that the Republicans are to blame. So if you're going to say Republicans bad, I agree.
Yeah.
No argument here.
We take that 128 billion surplus, and then first year with George W. Bush, it becomes 158 billion deficit, gigantic spending. That's 2002. Then fiscal year 2003, it doubles. It more than doubles. It goes to 378 billion. 2004, it goes up almost another 50 billion to 413. Then they start to pull in the reins a little bit. It goes from 413 to 318. It goes down a little bit more to 248 in 2006. And so it looks like he's reining in some of that issue. 2007, 161 billion. And which looks okay, so far so good, right? And then 2008, obviously because of all the instability, the crashes and whatnot, the deficit balloons to 459, so about $500 billion, a huge jump there. And then 2009, 1.16 trillion. Now it's not fair. I mean the budget there doubled. It's not fair to blame all of that on him, right? Like Bill Clinton did a lot of deregulation, other stuff, right, that led to the crash, but.
I think if we want to talk about the causes of the 2008
that's
crisis,
a long discussion, probably. Yeah,
that is another discussion that we will have to have some other time.
Yeah, so but I think we can kind of somewhat say 100% of that 1 trillion is not for him to blame, right? So I think that's fair to say.
I'm not so sure I'm going to give you that one that easily.
What's weird is that you're the one trying to protect him here, and I'm the one trying to protect him, and you're the one trying to be again, which is kind of hilarious. That's good, right?
Protect who? George W. Bush?
I'm the one trying to be generous, and you're the one who's kind of okay, he really didn't have to spend that much, which is kind of interesting that I'm the one who's trying to be extra generous there, right?
Fair enough. Credit to you. You're a kind-hearted, generous soul.
So yeah, then we go with Obama, right? Economy is terrible here. It holds at, so it was 1.16 in 2009. It's a tad lower at just 1 trillion in 2010. Obviously, it ticks up to 1.3, and then 2012 it ticks back down to 1.087 if you're curious. 2013 it almost halves. And again, this is in the middle of some really tough times, right? So it goes from 1.087 to 679 billion. So that's quite impressive, and I don't think most people would be able to cut 400 billion in such a tough time. And then he cuts again. 2014, he goes from 679 to 485. Then to 438, and then there's a bit of a bounce. 2016 jumps back up, 585, and then 666 is 2017. So,
right. And can you share with me where you're reading these numbers from?
I can give you the link right now.
Yeah, please. Dead air time. That's
I mean, you can fill it with some stuff if you want.
Well, it's bottom of the 7th here at Fenway Park, and we've got bases loaded, 2 outs.
Anyway, so there's this discussion that goes around, right? That like Obama was a reckless spender. I mean, just looking at his deficits, one would struggle to argue that, and I think you would probably agree with me on that one. Going from 1 trillion from fiscal year 2009, 1.16 with George W. Bush, right, and then ending with 666. So it's just an odd comment. But I'm interested in your thoughts on that one before we move on.
My thoughts about
Obama as this crazy reckless spender.
Okay, well,
given his deficits,
what has been missing in this discussion so far is the role that Congress has to play. Presidents are.
You mean in appropriations, or?
Yes, that's right. Because our system has kind of been bastardized, but originally it was conceived, the Constitution says, Article 1, Congress shall have the power to control spending. It doesn't say that exactly, but Congress has the power of the purse. It's Congress that decides on what money will be spent and how much money will be spent. Congress also controls raising revenues. Now, what's changed since the ink began to dry in the Constitution was that I think it was under Woodrow Wilson, or around about that time, Congress passed an act where it was the president who would propose a budget and then Congress would vote on it, ratify it. But appropriations are still controlled by Congress nominally. So there is kind of now this hybrid system where, yes, presidents have an influence, they have a say over the budget, but it's ultimately the responsibility.
You would probably say the biggest say, right? The bully pulpit, so to speak.
I wouldn't actually. I would say that Congress has the biggest control.
You don't think his veto pen? I mean, he doesn't have a line item veto, but you don't think that his just normal veto is that, and his bully pulpit, his airtime, whatnot, that doesn't account for much power?
Well, I mean, this is not a rhetorical question. I'm actually curious to know, when was the last time the president vetoed a congressional budget?
Well, why doesn't he? Because as being in the bully pulpit, he works, significantly with the different parties to get to a resolution that he's willing to sign, right? Like, by the time he gets to his desk, he's already flexed his muscles, so to speak.
Sure, but my contention there, I mean, this is kind of unknowable, but my belief is that the presidential veto is an empty threat when it comes to the budget. Now,
No. I mean, it's tough to veto it, but behind closed doors, I mean, presidents threaten it constantly. Like, you know what? Like, you can't send me this budget. Like, it's absolutely no way. Like, I will risk political capital on this one, and people will rework budgets. Like, there's all sorts of books that I've read that talk about, before a bill is even put on the floor, there's so many discussions that take place, right, before you even craft that bill.
Oh yeah, for bills in general, I have no argument that presidential threats of vetoes are a very serious policy crafting tool, but when it comes to the budget, we know what happens if Congress does not pass a budget.
Oh yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, exactly.
And
very uniquely American.
Historically, government shutdowns have not gone well for people who are seen as causing it.
Yes,
so
yeah.
The president is saying, Congress isn't giving me what I want. I'm going to veto the budget, and we'll just have a shutdown until Congress gets its act together. That president, like Trump, gets the blame for the shutdown, and it blows up in his face. Whereas if it's Congress saying, the president's being unreasonable, we're going to stick to our guns, and the government shuts down as a result, like it did in 2013 or 2011, it is widely seen in public polling that in that case, Obama was not to blame, it was Congress for the government shutdown. So, if the president's going to say, I'm going to veto your budget, and if we have a shutdown, then so be it, as Trump tried to do, kind of, then Congress is going to call the bluff of the president. The president's going to cave because shutdowns aren't good for whoever causes them.
Yeah,
so that's kind of my basic theory about, yes, presidents can and do veto legislation. That's a powerful tool, but not when it comes to the budget.
I think I would agree with you when push comes to shove and it's that last mile, that last 20%, the president has exhausted his political capital. And you're right, once enough of that has kind of happened, then yeah, there's very little he can do. Oh yeah, I think the echo, I might be able to fix it, by the way, Andre, one sec. Then we'll finish up the data set.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, there's an echo because I had my speakers pointed at my mic, which is not the best thing. Yeah. Okay, is that better, Andre? All right, so up till now we 2017 Obama's last budget 66th.
Right.
All right, so then Trump comes in 2018, right? It is an increase. I'm not shocked at all. For record keeping, I gave Bush 2 points there for doubling the deficit twice.
Bush the first or Bush the second?
The second. Obama, if people want, I can give him a point. I would be less inclined to, only looking at the numbers. I don't see a huge jump at any point. The numbers fall in line. Previous year, 1 trillion, 1 trillion. The only jump I saw was from 2010 to 2011, where it went from 1 to 1.3. But that was deficit spending, right, to kind of push the economy forward. But it wasn't like a doubling. That would be But I mean, if people want, we can throw a point there just for fun. So
right, well, I don't think you can just ignore one of the largest deficits in American history because it was like exigent circumstances.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm definitely not. We're noting it. But let me finish off we can go into the particular. Let me finish off the data set. So Trump's first budget, 779, and then immediately almost a 50% increase goes to 1.1 trillion. 1.092. So I think that is sort of reckless, especially since the economy didn't necessarily warrant it, right? No. And then it stays again at that 1.1, and then it drops a little bit to 1 for our fiscal year 2021. So I think once again you see there's this need to spend more so for Republicans, I would say, than for Democrats. And if we just go based on the points totals, Reagan with 2, George H.W. Bush with 2, George W. Bush with 2, Obama, I can throw 1 if that makes people happy, Trump with 1 or half a point. The argument that both parties deficit spend the same, I just don't think holds up just because the numbers aren't there. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, by the way, Paperback?
So my thoughts would be that you can't ignore Congress. You've got to look at who's controlling Congress in these periods. And that my counter-argument would be...
I mean, in these periods, sorry to interrupt, but in these periods, would you be saying that, for Reagan, his Congress was very, very blue, and so the 2 points that I awarded to him were really because of the blue Congress, not the red president? Because I don't think you're saying that, but that's kind of what you're implying. Because the Congress was red too.
My position is that both parties are to blame. That Reagan, yes, exploded deficits and made the problem worse, but the Democrats also allowed him to do it and seemed all too happy to go along with it. So.
Yeah,
to both
but I
parties.
mean, like I said, as we went through this, you know, it just there were plenty of opportunities for Democrats, right, to double, triple, half thing, but those just didn't really occur. The only instance we have is once with Obama in 2011, in the heart of the Great Recession, and I even gave you that one. So I just and can we talk a little bit about, like, if me and you were both interested in the debt? Let's say that's a genuine, sincere interest for both of us. Let's give each other that, right? The only way to pay it down is with surpluses or with shrinking deficits, right? So the moment,
Well, okay, sure, yeah, shrinking the deficit.
yeah,
Correct.
I mean the only thing increasing the deficit is doing it in most instances, is adding to the debt, right? So I'm trying my hardest to be as generous as I can with these arguments, but economically, monetarily, just numerically, I can't say both parties are deficit spending the same, because they're just not, right? They're just not doing it. That's not the case.
Okay, well, here'd be my two-thrust counter attack. On the one hand, we have to look at what causes deficit spending. And the biggest cause of that would be increasingly Social Security, but Social Security has actually been solvent for a lot of its history, not all of it. It's required occasional, time to time, like tweaks and fixes, which were happening kind of regularly up until about the 1990s. But for most of its history as a program, Medicare and Medicaid has been ballooning in terms of costs. And there have been attempts to control the costs, attempts which have failed. So if you look at federal spending as a whole, you and I both know this, the vast majority, okay, not the vast majority, but the majority of federal spending is mandatory spending. It's mandated by law. That is, we are, according to existing statutes, the federal government is obligated to spend a certain amount of money on Social Security, on Medicare and Medicaid, and servicing the debt, obviously.
I think we should talk about Social Security for sure, but it just seems like you're kind of giving me the point, though, here. Like, the Republicans are bad spenders, and they're not just slightly bad; they're significantly bad spenders compared to the Democrats.
Republicans are bad spenders, yeah, but so are the Democrats, because
But
both parties.
wait, so give me the fiscal years that Democrats you could point to and say this is not okay. This is irresponsible.
Well, obviously.
I mean, if it's there.
2009.
So the fiscal year 2008 budget was under George W. Bush.
Okay, but the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress.
Yeah, totally understood. Yeah, but again, the fiscal year 2008 budget was $459 billion, and partly because of the Great Recession. And we just talked about how I was being generous with him allowing it to balloon. But to say that that's because there was a Democratic Congress and not talk about the Great Recession, not talk about the president, like, it just seems kind of irresponsible to throw 2008 at the Democrats' feet. That doesn't seem fair to me, is what I'm saying.
Okay, well, if you want to talk about fairness, I'm willing to.
I mean, ideologically fair kind of thing.
All right. Well, I'm willing to consider the idea that if you want to say, well, 2008 was an aberration, it was an unprecedented financial crisis, and the Democrats, maybe wisely, maybe not, decided we're just going to throw money at the problem. But we recognize that, yes, this is extremely dangerous, but it's a one-off. And you want to say they can't be blamed for doing a one-off spending splurge. Okay, maybe. But by the same token, I would say then you've got to give some credit to the congressional Republicans in 2011, 2012, and 2013 who battled Obama. I mean, we were both alive at the time. I was paying attention to politics. I don't know about you, but I'm willing to give, I'm sure you did. You know, we all remember John Boehner and then later Paul Ryan going and negotiating with Obama, having debt ceiling battles and government shutdowns, and those were the years where the deficit fell sharpest.
If you remember, though, that was, I mean, Obama wasn't kicking and screaming there. Like, his goal was to drop the. I think we were saying like Obama wanted to spend more but didn't have the opportunity to. And I'm sure that there's instances, right? There were some programs he wanted that they axed, right? But I wouldn't buy the argument that like he was gonna like double the budget if it were not for the Republicans. And one of the reasons I would give is because Boehner, you know, in 2002, 3, 4, 5, like when when we went from surpluses with Clinton to giant doublings with George W. Bush, I mean, the Republicans were nowhere to be found, right? I just, and also just the way kind of you make arguments, Paperback, it just seems like you're trying to make it a partisan thing when like, oh, well, it's every time the Democrats come into power, and then you find excuses like, well, this was the president, but this was Congress. Like, it doesn't look like you're really crunching the numbers. Like, what happened from 02 to 07? Like, who did that? That was just one instance, right? What about George H.W. Bush? What happened with George H.W. Bush? Issues there.
George H.W. Bush was a Republican president with. Oh, George W. Bush.
No, his father. So
his father. Yeah. So he was a Republican president with a Democratic-controlled Congress. Both houses of Congress under H.W. Bush were controlled by the Democrats.
For all 4 years. For 5 years? Because I don't think that's the case.
I believe at least the first 2 years. They might have done it, and the Republicans might have done. I have this chart in front of me. Let's see. 1988, the election year. Okay, so going into 1988, the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress, Senate and House. And they continued to control both houses of Congress up until the elections of 1994, when Newt Gingrich came to power, right?
Yeah. And I mean, even if you look, like I said, at current spending, right, when we had both houses for Republicans in 2018, 2019, there was not. I just think like you're kind of bending backwards to try to make it seem like the Democrats are trying to spend like crazy and the Republicans are cutting left and right, because 18 and 19 in 2020, like that doesn't make sense either. Like Obama ended.
There's no contention here. There's no argument that the Republicans right now in power are horrible spenders who are spending irresponsibly. There's no argument there.
So if someone came to you, Paperback, and said that in the past, not right now, but in the past, the Republicans were horrible spenders, more so than the Democrats, and gave you this data, that wouldn't be something hard for you to swallow. Like, that would be a reasonable argument.
Well, again, I would agree with you that in 2003, we can talk about Afghanistan, but in 2003, George W. Bush launched a war in Iraq, which was a huge expenditure.
What about 2002? Well, forget 2003. What about 2002?
2002, we were ramping up. The federal government was ramping up the war on terror. And, we spoke a bit about the financial crisis in 2008. If you want to call that a black swan event, we can't entirely blame the people in power for reacting the way they did. Well, 9/11 was also a black swan event, which prompted an enormous expenditure of monies at the federal level. Are we really going to say that, well, the financial crisis was a complete aberration where the spending that happened can't really be said to be, illegitimate, whereas after 9/11, George W. Bush should have said, now is the time to cut the federal budget.
You know what? That's an actual wonderful point. I think we should talk about that too. We can go back to Social Security, but I think last calculation I saw was that because of the war against Iraq and a lot of unnecessary wars, between $3,000 to $8,000 per American was spent unnecessarily. Iraq didn't attack us on 9/11. Iraq didn't associate with the 9/11 hijackers. Iraq didn't support that. Like, there was no connection between 9/11 and Iraq, right?
No argument here.
Yeah. So anyways, my contention just is not that crazy. Looking at the numbers, looking at who is in power, I think it becomes harder and harder to make the argument that the Republicans are as fiscally sound as the Democrats, because looking at the Democrats' record, people don't give them credit for their surpluses. They don't give them credit for the times they bring the deficits down.
Then there's the question
people move credit. So great example is like when Obama lowered deficits, immediately you give that to the Republicans. And I feel like that's if every year we say, okay, we give this to the president, and then this one year where the president does something, we immediately move it to Congress. I mean, if you want, I can make a similar table, and we can just look at Congresses, and I guarantee you that Republican Congresses will spend more.
I would actually like to see that. I'm open-minded to the results because I was about to say, I think the root of our disagreement here, what we're really arguing about is not the numbers. It's who gets the blame. Is it Congress or the president?
Yeah.
You say that the president is driving this whole thing. I say no. It's Congress that's responsible for this.
Okay, we maybe another time we can pull up that data set, but
sure.
I don't think that Clinton's surpluses were built because of Republicans. I think
then the other point I would make is that whether the deficit goes up or down, or how much it goes up and down. And I'm obviously bringing the deficit down is good, and to the extent that politicians of various parties attempt to decrease the deficit, they deserve credit for that. But I would say that the bigger problem is that the federal government has been spending money at a rate that is unsustainable, defined as the debt is growing faster than the economy. The federal government's budget is growing faster than the economy can sustain it.
I'm going to pass it on to you if you want to do Social Security, or you can continue on to that event. What would you like to discuss as your kind of like point?
Well, I think we should discuss entitlements in general.
Okay. Yeah, that's
my contention, is that those are what's driving the biggest drivers of deficit spending for the most part.
So are you aware? I pulled it up. I had like 30 minutes to do a little bit of research today. I was out most of the day, but
me too.
Are you aware of the amount that the hole is for Social Security up until I think 2080? For how much would the hole be? Do you know that number?
WHOLE.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can give it to you, and you can tell me if I'm widely off. But from the source that I got, it's about 13 trillion that Social Security needs to kind of sustain itself to like 2080. So it's 13 trillion in the hole. And I'm sure if you pulled up something, we'd probably be near a similar estimate.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And more pressing than 2080 is that Social Security is forecasted to be not bankrupt, but insolvent by 2032, I think it is.
I believe that's similar to there's somewhere in the 2030s that I saw where the amount of money that it's bringing in is nowhere near enough to sustain its spending. Yeah, so it would be terrible.
According to Reason.com, who wrote this? Which author?
Yeah, I think we totally agree there. Yeah, so my response to Social Security would be
2035. Social Security will be unable to pay the full value of promised benefits by 2035 as of 2019.
So my response would be, okay, there's this $13 trillion hole. How do we fix it? I think one of the things that we could do is stop blowing holes in our budget. So let me give a perfect example. Trump blew a $5 trillion hole in our budget, and so that $5 trillion. Essentially, if he hadn't blown it, we could have moved it to the Social Security problem. We would have essentially solved 40 to 50% of the problem right there. $5
trillion. Are you saying that that's the amount of debt he added over the first 4 years of his presidency?
No. 5 trillion. It's 5.8 trillion. I can give you the CNBC article. Due to his tax cuts, the lowering of the corporate tax rates.
In other words, that his tax cuts had the government forego $5 trillion.
Yeah. So the way it swings is when a tax goes, not only is it missed opportunity to collect it, some of the taxes were in negative realm, so that they went below zero. So it's like not only were you not collecting a certain amount of money, but you ended up owing even more. So I'll link this to you if you'd like, but this is not like an absurd, odd number. This $5 trillion's been quoted in a number of places, and when you talk to Republicans, they talk about growth and the economy and how it's going to help things. But I'm just saying, if we think Social Security is a problem that needs solving, it's hard to solve these problems when you drop $6 trillion. This $5.8 trillion hole. It gets harder and harder to do that.
The relevant question becomes, and again, I don't know the answer to this, although I suspect I know it. Did Trump's tax cuts cut the tax rate, the Social Security tax rate? Because
payroll taxes? You mean?
Yeah. Do you make a wage? Do you get paid a wage?
Yeah. Yes. Right. I have payroll taxes. Yeah.
Right. So you'll see that there's an income tax and then there's a Social Security tax. Did the Trump tax cuts reduce the Social Security tax rates?
As far as people's paychecks, I know that there was a change in the formula for withholding, such that if you had, let's say, a number 2 withholding, it was more aggressive in the past. They would withhold more, and Trump decided that that was not necessary. And so now, like, if you have like a 0, you withhold less, or you have a 1, less is withheld, essentially. So what that the effect of that is that more money are in people's pockets per paycheck. And when you scale it throughout the year, it comes up with some amount of money between $600 to $1,000 for the average $50,000 worker. So
Sure.
that's the only effect I know on people's paychecks and payroll taxes.
Right. So my point there would be, I mean, we were discussing Social Security specifically, I thought. So Social Security is funded by a separate tax.
Yeah, by payroll
they
taxes.
borrow
Yeah.
from the Social Security fund all the time, but it's paid for through Social Security, and the Social Security tax is one of the few taxes that has very few
paperback.
carbon.
Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but before you go too far, I mean, is this addressing my question of, like, you know, when people blow a $6 trillion hole in the budget, it just makes it harder to pay things? Is this going to come to that, or?
Okay,
I just
well,
didn't hear an
alright.
answer when I asked
Okay,
that.
if you want, all right, I thought we were discussing Social Security, but if you want to talk about the budget deficit as a whole, fine. Yes.
No, we were talking about Social Security. I was just saying, like, we could have fixed half of Social Security if we just didn't blow this hole. That's my contention, is that Social Security was a problem that was fixable.
Right.
It just became harder with Trump.
Okay, here's a direct answer to your question. When a Congress and a president pass tax cuts without commensurate spending cuts, yes, that makes deficits worse, that makes the debt problem worse. But I would say that where we disagree is I see spending as being the driving, what drives the problem.
No, I think, but isn't a cut a spend, essentially? It's a loss of revenue, right? So there's the way a balance sheet works, right? There's assets, liabilities, right? But there's expenses and revenues. So what ends up happening is you cut revenues, and so
Yes.
that has a tangible effect on being able to pay for things like social. So
Right,
I mean,
and the
tomorrow,
responsible
if
thing would be to then say we're going to have commensurate cuts in spending. We're
Yeah.
cutting taxes by $5 trillion. We will have $5 trillion in less spending over the same period of time. And the Republicans did not do that. That's why I'm quite happy to concede. The Republicans are terrible on this question of spending.
well, on top of that,
Equally to
they're
blame.
terrible with budgets. They constantly double, triple deficits year
Okay,
after
but-
year, as we went over.
The chief driver of the growth of the debt and deficit has been entitlements. And neither
but we
party
could-
is willing to reform entitlements in a meaningful way.
But you would agree that if we had more money to put towards entitlements, it would not be a problem, right? Just say tomorrow, for the sake of argument, we had $13 trillion pop up in our accounts, ready to go. Let's say a number...
In whose accounts? The economy and the
And-
government's
and-
coffers? What?
No, yeah, in the government's coffers, in the treasuries.
Okay.
Let's just say, and you might say, well, where did these pop out of? I don't know. Let's say, like,
Let's just
thousands
for
of
sake
billionaires.
argument that we win a sudden and stealth war against China, and they pay us an indemnity of 13 billion.
So you see what I mean? Like, these problems of the $13 trillion hole, if we have $20 trillion in our pocket, it becomes a problem that we can deal with, right? So it's kind of like, have you ever had like a tire pop on you and you had to go buy a new tire?
Yes, actually.
So what happens if you have absolutely no money? Like, that's a very difficult problem. But if you have like 10 grand in your bank account, is that really an issue?
Well, yeah, I agree. If you have more money, it's easier to solve problems.
So-
I'm not sure that's really a contentious point.
My contention is that the Republicans' irresponsible spending and budgets, they're just crazy. I'm not saying that Democrats are completely off the hook either. I'm just saying, if I had to put a percentage to it, I would say it's about 65-35. I would say 65% of the blame of why we're in this mess is because we cut too much in revenue all the time from Reagan until now, and we end up with less revenues as a result. And when you have less revenues, you can't spend properly, right?
All right. And here's where I would disagree. I would say that the problem is not that one party or another cut revenues, because in theory, you can grow the economy fast enough to make up for the decreased marginal rates of taxation. Because it's always important to remember that there's the tax rate, but then there's what the government actually collects.
The effective rate, yeah.
That's right. And there's this really interesting chart where if you plot government revenues over time, going back to the end of World War II, and if you have, on the one hand, the percentage of government revenues as a percentage of GDP, and then marginal tax rates, you will see that the marginal tax rates go up quite a lot, go up and down quite a lot. You know, in the 50s, we had a top marginal tax rate of 90%, famously, and then, you know, Kennedy cut taxes, and Reagan cut them even more. And yet, this didn't actually have an effect on government revenues as a percentage of GDP. Government revenues have been steady for the past 70 years almost at about 18% of GDP. That is, the government can confiscate about 18% of the economy and take it.
Why do you use the word confiscate? Do you believe taxation is theft?
Well, I mean, do you consent to taxation?
Do you consent?
Personally?
No, I'm asking you.
To the government and say, "Here, I want you to take this money from me."
I know. I personally consent to taxation, but do you not consent to taxation?
No, I don't.
Wait, so tomorrow, if you could,
I resent them taking my money, and if I could put a stop to it, I would, and I would keep the money for myself.
Okay, so tomorrow, let's just say you had your way, right? You were able to success. Before we get too out, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm introducing a third topic.
I mean,
have we wrapped up the second one?
Moment.
Okay, I was gonna say, because the second one, I think the way we, just to summarize, I guess, ended was we both agree there's a problem, and we both think that problem needs fixing given how much of the budget, Social Security and other things. But I think I'm identifying X as the problem, as the root cause of the problem, right? Which is that do you believe, by the way, in irresponsible tax cuts? Is that a thing, or is that not? Like, if I were to lower all taxes to zero, you would believe that that's irresponsible, right?
No, I think the irresponsible thing would be to not cut spending by commensurate levels.
No, I just meant, like, tomorrow Trump proposes all taxes are gone, like, right? So just tomorrow, boom, you get no taxes. And I'm just saying that would be irresponsible, right? Just a very simple question.
The question is,
it's an extreme question.
Spending, because to me, the question of, if Trump's proposing abolish all taxes tomorrow, but we continue spending as we are, well, yeah, that's irresponsible.
Yeah.
But if Trump says we're going to abolish all taxes tomorrow and we will also cut spending by 99%, and the remaining 1% we ask humbly for voluntary donations, I would say, well, that's risky, but it's not irresponsible.
I mean, we wouldn't have like a standing arm. There's a lot of things that would go the wayside, but I wasn't implying that he would do a commensurate spending cut. I was just saying, like, if you have these liabilities and you're cutting,
if it is assumed that spending will continue on the current trend,
yes,
and into that mix we throw radical tax cuts, I would say yes, that's irresponsible.
Okay, perfect. So you agree that there's an idea of radical tax cuts, right? That's a thing. Okay, so I'm arguing that this idea is not only just a thing, it has been Republican policy for decades.
Well, I mean, I noticed at the beginning of this conversation you started with Gerald Ford. I would point out that John F. Kennedy came into office as a Democrat, as I'm sure you remember, and what did he do? He cut taxes. And the economy, which was kind of moribund for most of the 50s, actually, in the early 60s, the economy was quite strong after these Kennedy tax cuts.
Well, I'm not saying that tax cuts are. We just had a discussion on, is there such a thing as an irresponsible tax cut? I think you would also agree that there's such a thing as a responsible tax increase. Like you would say that a tax increase to take care of Social Security, and let's say you don't want to affect benefits. You want benefits to freeze, right? So if benefits are going to freeze, the only option you have is to increase taxes. There's no other way around it, right? So I mean, it's math. There's only so many ways you can do it. So if that's the case,
well, actually, on that point, if you froze benefits.
No, but I'm saying
that the economy could grow to the point where revenues at current tax rates would match the obligations of Social Security.
Yeah, but
in theory, but
that's a side point. My contention is that there's such a thing as a responsible tax increase, just as there's a thing as a responsible tax decrease.
I mean, it depends on the particulars. For instance, not all.
I don't know. No, one thing, Paperback. Why is this a hard? This seems like this is a hard pill for you to swallow.
I would say that if, for instance, Elizabeth Warren's proposing a wealth tax, that would be a tax increase. But I would say it's an irresponsible tax increase.
But that's not. But
wealth taxes in particular are very destructive.
But that's not what I said. That's absolutely not what I said. That's a straw man. I didn't mention wealth tax. I just said that there might be.
You're not specifying what kind of tax. Are we talking about
you can define it.
Tax?
No.
If we're talking about just income tax.
No. I'm not even saying just income. I'm saying any tax. So you define the tax at any level. It doesn't have to be an income. Can there be a tax increase that is responsible in order to fund some sort of liability? Is that idea? That's a very basic idea.
That's the critical point, which is if a government says we have this thing we are going to spend money on, maybe it's a old age entitlement program, maybe it's a war, doesn't really matter, but they say we are going to spend money on this thing, we are going to raise these taxes to pay for it. Yes, I would agree that is responsible.
Sorry,
caveat being, unless they say we're just going to levy a 100% income tax or something ridiculous like that.
Paperbacks.
No, that wouldn't be responsible.
Sometimes I feel like I'm pulling teeth because the proposals I'm making are so. I mean, they're not exotic or crazy. They're just, hey, sometimes if you want to do like a minor tax increase to make up for a minor pitfall,
all right,
like I get
you on the other foot.
No,
ask you.
I was gonna say I get that there's nuance. I totally understand there's nuance, but I'm saying that as an idea in it, sometimes there's ideas in and of themselves that are dangerous, right? So like to say, for instance, that the idea that women should be able to vote, like that idea in and of itself, that women should not have that right? That idea in and of itself to me seems very dangerous. Like that's hard to kind of start with, right? But the idea that like you could have a tax that could fill some sort of gap, like that's just economics 101, right? Vice versa, you could have a tax cut also, and then not have to, because maybe let's say there's too much, you don't need that much revenue, right? Like the program is sufficient with the revenues that we have. Or you do some sort of like simplification, right? Like the tax code.
I think you cut out there. I didn't catch everything you said.
Oh, sorry. What did you last hear?
It was just a few seconds. Just start over, like from 30 seconds ago.
I think we seem to just agree, right? Like there are reasonable tax increases and there are reasonable tax cuts. But then I think we also agree that there.
Get us anywhere.
Well, the next step is there are unreasonable tax increases, which you would absolutely agree on, right? Like you just jumped on it, right? But there are also unreasonable tax cuts. That's like irresponsible tax cuts is what I'm saying.
All right. Where I would disagree is I'd say it's never irresponsible of the government to allow people to keep more of their own money. It's irresponsible of the government to do that and then say, and we're not going to change the government's spending patterns to match this changed set of circumstances.
So let's say, the government's responsible for getting electricity to people's homes, right? And in order to do so, they need a certain amount of money. Like electricity is not going to generate itself. It needs capital to be able to have it. You need generators, you need fuel, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If a government should decide to irresponsibly place tax cuts such that they can't raise revenue to generate electricity for its constituents, that would, in my mind, be an irresponsible tax cut. Is that too, like, controversial? Again, then the government would not meet its aim of getting electricity to its paying customers because it has lost the ability to do that.
So in this scenario, hypothetically, you need, let's just say, $100 to fund the electricity program, and the government cuts its electricity tax so that the total amount of money taken from the economy by the government is only $80.
It makes itself insolvent. Yes,
Right.
it makes itself insolvent. That would be irresponsible.
I would say no, that's not inherently irresponsible if the economy is growing so fast that, like, okay, even though the tax rate has gone down, there's so much more money in the economy that the amount of dollars
So
being taken in taxes.
So this is the problem when in philosophy, when you have a question, right? Like whether it be the trolley question or anything, the goal is not to introduce new variables into the equation to get the answer you want. The goal is to answer the equation with the variables that are already set up. So you introduce the variable specifically that there's this growth of the economy, and that's not where that's. So I'm a scientist, right? I don't know about you, but when we do science, we have one moving variable and we hold all things constant, right? What you're not doing that though, which is very like ideologically inconsistent. So if I want to do a science experiment, I have one moving variable, I have a control, I have a positive control, a negative control, right? You can't be allowed to just be like, oh, but the economy is growing here, so that's okay.
No, but that
doesn't answer the question.
Be a scientist, but in terms of public policy, this does matter. You can't just ignore economic growth or economic shrinkage.
That's actually in economics. This is exactly what they do: is they isolate different variables in the economy, and they look
I'm
at
not denying they isolate variables, but
and they look at each of their
point about is there such a thing as irresponsible.
I mean,
tax cuts?
I think it's pretty telling, like listening to you, how hard it's for you to give certain like it makes sense to any, you know.
Well, I've given you my answer. I don't think there is anything inherently irresponsible about allowing people to keep more of their own money. What's irresponsible is deliberately cutting revenues and then not cutting spending to match it.
Okay, so again, yeah, we're at the same point. A government making itself insolvent, unable to meet its required criteria. In this case, we said which was electricity. That's irresponsible, and I would argue.
Well, you're assuming that the government will make itself insolvent. That's my point with economic growth, is that it's not a given that the government is going to make itself insolvent through tax cuts alone.
No, but again, when you create some sort of thought experiment, right? You're introducing things like, okay, well, I know that this is bad, so I'm going to throw growth into the mix, and I agree with you.
Okay, well,
if growth happens and
a thought experiment where it is given in this state of nature we're talking about.
Yes, there's no growth. Growth is stagnant.
Stagnant.
It's stagnant.
Right. In that case, then I would say yes, it's irresponsible to cut taxes if you are not also going to cut spending.
Okay, perfect.
But to me, the problem is not the tax cut; it's the spending.
So no, there's just when we have these conversations, it's important to get certain axioms right? So it's usually hard, especially like when I talk with libertarians, it's hard for them to concede certain points that I would say most Americans agree on. I think most Americans agree that there's
appeal to popularity doesn't mean anything.
No, no, you're right. Yeah, so like, who cares what most? But I would say most economists would also agree that like the idea that there's an irresponsible tax cut is not controversial. Like that's a thing, right? The idea that there's irresponsible spending, you didn't even at that moment hesitate. You jumped on that. It's basically it's a pendulum, right? Like both sides move. Like they're equal sides of the pendulum, are they not? One side is spending, one side is cutting.
Well, that's less of a pendulum and more of a scale you're describing.
Yeah.
But
okay.
Yeah, I would. All right. Yeah, I agree that spending and revenues are important when assessing this question, but I think that the most important thing is spending. That's what you've got to focus on. It's not about revenues. It's about spending.
You would agree that like you could easily make spending difficult if you did irresponsible tax cuts. Like it's hard to buy a tire when you don't have the money to buy a tire, right? But it's easy to buy a tire when you. So a great example, we just talked about this, when Trump spends $5.8 trillion that he doesn't have. That's money that could have been used.
Hang on.
That's money that could have been used.
Tax cuts are spending?
No. I'm saying that's money that has now left the equation. It's gone, and that's money that would have been part of the revenues, right? Otherwise.
Okay, so I would quibble with your phrasing What you should say, or what I think you ought to say, is that when Trump spends $5 trillion without finding a way to pay for it, that is irresponsible. Yes.
Sure, yeah. I mean, if he did tax increases on the other side, you're right. I would be with you, because then, even if he's cutting, he's on the other side. Yeah, but I never disagreed with, like, there was no point during this that I ever said that that's not the case, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't really understand why we're discussing Trump or his tax cuts, because, look, I've already conceded, yeah, the Republicans, especially right now, are terrible on deficits and spending.
But you also conceded that there's such a thing as irresponsible tax cuts. But what you're not, I guess, what were the jump?
Yeah, there's
the logical
thing as
leap.
an irresponsible tax cut, but it doesn't matter.
But
Spending
it does.
matters.
No, it does matter, because we just talked about this, right? This might be the last time I repeat it, right? But if you have a lot of money on hand, if you're a very rich government like Brunei, right? These things aren't as hard to pay for if you have the wherewithal. But if you're like Somalia, right, or you're like Angola, and you don't have the money to spend, these problems become more difficult. My contention is we can't dig ourselves out of these holes because they keep blowing $6 trillion holes in our revenues. That's the problem.
Okay, but it kind of sounds like you're assuming that, money comes to the government first and then it goes into the economy. But it's the other way around.
Wait. Are you contending that 5.8 trillion would not have been earned by? Because I mean, that's.
All right. Let's back up a second. When you talked about Brunei and rich governments, all right, how do governments get money? How do governments get wealth? Right?
Through taxation.
Okay, but then where does the wealth come from to be taxed? Right.
It comes from the economy.
Okay, so you would agree that before the government can take money in revenue, that wealth has to be created in the private sector, yes?
Well, we haven't had economies, in vacuums without governments. They exist at the same time.
Sure,
usually.
we have. Black markets exist outside of government.
No, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as a black market. I'm just saying that it would be hard to point to a country with a economy and no government. That's not really a thing.
Well, it's hard to point to a country without government.
Yeah,
it's kind
exactly.
of an ergo propter hoc fallacy, where you say a government exists in this place, an economy also exists in this place, therefore it's the government that created the economy.
I mean, you're just kind of doing a chicken and egg. Like, is it the economy or is it the government?
You're doing chicken and egg, which is, there's no answer to this question. We can't, unless we have a
I
time
mean,
machine.
they exist together, right? Like, there's per Hobbes. Have you read the Leviathan?
I've tried to read the original, but it's a little too. The Old English is a little hard to get through, so I just read like
the translation,
Cliff Notes, and like an abridged version.
Yeah, so per Hobbes,
I'm familiar with Hobbes' ideas.
Yeah,
Yes.
he doesn't think that there were times, and he said if there were such a time that it would have been quite short. His contention is that there because of how bad a state of nature is, there have always been governments and government-like institutions to protect us from states of nature, which is why anarchy is not. It's kind of hard to find, around the world.
I don't think either of us wants this to become a discussion about statism versus anarchy, but I would counter with, Murray Rothbard's, what's his book, Creation of the State, where he talks specifically about this, about Hobbes and the state of nature, and points out that very often, people exist in a state of nature peacefully for the most part, not always because humans aren't perfect, and then a state comes in and creates violence where before there was none.
Think about it this way. Let's assume you had the power to. I mean, we're going on a little bit of a tangent, but and I think this is important because you are a libertarian, and I think like this stems to very close to your principles, right? But like, let's say tomorrow you could just dissolve the government, right? Let's just say you could.
If only.
So let's just say you succeeded, right? I'm sitting here in Southern California, you're in Northern California, right? And let's say I'm even going to give you that everyone in America is living harmoniously, that there are no issues whatsoever.
Okay.
I'm giving you you'd agree that that's quite generous, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Go on.
How long would it be until another country decided to invade and take everything we had?
All right. Well, that's why at the beginning of this I said I'm only a half-hearted anarchist. I do think that collective defense is something where the state does a reasonably good job at effecting a collective defense by using powers of coercion.
To be honest, you don't sound like very much of a libertarian. From libertarians I've spoken to, a lot of libertarians would not say the response you just did is all.
Well, we have to look at the world as it is and not the world as we would like it to be, right? And the world as it is a world with governments in it, and those governments control vast amounts of resources. Also, by the way, I didn't say this, but maybe it's relevant. I studied military history in college, so I know a little about this. And basically, my belief is that wars in the modern period are essentially confiscating. It's a struggle to confiscate your entire economic output, convert it into military output, military power, and then direct it against your enemy. And whoever is most efficient at confiscating their economic output, and whoever has the largest economic output to start with, is going to have an overwhelming advantage in a military struggle. That's why the United States was able to defeat both Nazi Germany and Japan at the same time. That's why Germany couldn't defeat the Soviet Union. But I would point out that's only for the biggest of wars between the biggest of countries. At a smaller scale, like for instance, Costa Rica has no military. I don't know if you know that.
Well, I had a question actually for you. You said that's why Germany couldn't defeat USSR. Was your contention that the USSR's economy was greater than that of Germany's?
There's a lot of debate about that. I've looked into this a little bit because the Soviets were just lying about all their economic statistics, and it's like when you have a centrally planned economy, can you even meaningfully determine the size of your economy? But we do know that Germany had fewer people than the Soviet Union, and I believe that to borrow a phrase, I should give credit to the author who said this. I can't remember his name. Human beings are the ultimate form of capital. Human capital is the ultimate form of capital. When you have more people in the Soviet Union, you do have more needs for consumption, for resources, but you can also do more things. And that's, you will have fundamentally a stronger economy, at least if you do things right. Obviously you can fuck up your economy like Russia did in World War I, but if you have more people, you will have an economic advantage.
No, I definitely agree with that. Actually, there's an economic professor who he's been very prophetic with his economic projections, and the reason why is he's like, it's not really that big of a secret, and I've taught this to people around the world. The reason I got famous is because I calculated that there were X amount of people in the age group between 20 to 35. I linked that as growth and the ability to generate more revenue. And then I just moved the equation forward. He's like, if you have more young people, they're going to boom and help support the economy. He's like, that's really it. And he's like, that's why I saw issues with China and their one-child policy.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said, yeah. Well,
the author was Julian Simon, and his book was The Ultimate Resource.
Nice. Okay, cool. But I think I wouldn't say the USSR was a bigger economy than Germany. I don't think that would hold most measures, to be honest.
In 1940?
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember the USSR did lose.
The US. Are we talking about the Soviet Union or the United States?
The Soviet Union.
Oh,
the USSR.
I thought you said the US. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I must have cut out the USSR.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, I think we would both agree the US was greater than both of those.
Sure,
combined.
I don't think that's really a controversial statement.
I lost track of whose point. So I did point
I just
A.
wanted
You
to
did.
finish up this point about
Yeah, go ahead.
collective defense at a smaller. So the anarchists, well, I should say the anarcho-capitalists would say, all right, look, if we could turn back time and go back to the beginning, anarcho-capitalism would lead to radical decentralization. There wouldn't be these giant superstates like the United States or China or Germany that, maybe somewhere in a corner of the earth, a warlord would, take over and reconstruct a government, but he'd only be able to control a small patch of land. And that's what you saw in medieval Europe, where you had a lot of princely states that were just kind of like a city and the surrounding farm fields, and beyond that it was some other principality. But in the So in that fictional world, it is conceivable, yeah, you could have just voluntary defense where militias and private security companies could ward off whatever, marauders would come and try to steal your stuff. But in the world we live in currently, yeah, if you set up successfully, let's just say California for the sake of argument, California secedes from the United States and says, okay, we're just going to give anarcho-capitalism a whack. It's entirely conceivable. Yeah, China would think, hey, we can just go over there and steal California and subjugate it to ourselves and confiscate a big portion of its economy and make ourselves richer at the expense of Californians. And I don't think California, with all its resources, even as the 8th largest economy in the world, I don't think California would be able to fend off the Chinese, even assuming, as soon as they seceded from the U.S., they began, buying arms and things, like tanks and whatnot.
Cool. Okay, I think we fleshed that one out. Cool. That was a good discussion.
I think that would be interesting to talk about at greater length some other time.
I think it's my go.
Go ahead. Yeah,
and so for this one, I was interested in something you said about taxation being theft. So
you're right. Go ahead.
To go into that, do you know about the Articles of Confederation? Basically, our pre-Constitution, so to speak.
I'm aware of them.
So my argument is that the Articles of Confederation were probably the closest libertarians could get to a libertarian government, probably in the history of Earth, from what I have seen.
Yeah. That's not an unreasonable assertion. Yeah.
So, but this goes back and ties into taxation as theft. So, why did we get rid of those, Articles of Confederation? Why did we create the Constitution that we all love so much and we say is what makes us American, right? So the idea is that taxation isn't theft, but taxation is needed for a prosperous, happy, well-lived life. And without taxation, humans aren't able to actualize themselves. Taxation is the tool by which a human can be protected, can thrive, can live in such a way to where they are meeting their most biggest potential. And this is why governments are so popular and why they're all over the place, right? So when I hear from libertarians and other people say taxation is theft, if you want to get rid of taxation, we can. We just talked about removing governments, right? But then all the things that we cherish go away, and we end up in a state of nature, and we end up worse off. So why is this idea that taxation is theft? Why is it? If anything, taxation is patriotic. It's what makes. Without taxation, there would be no United States of America, right?
Oh boy! All right. Couple of things. You say that taxation isn't theft because it's necessary. That doesn't logically follow. I could say human beings need to eat food, therefore I'm justified in murdering you and eating you. Well, that may be necessary, but it would still be an act of murder and cannibalism.
So theft implies non-consent, right? So I'm arguing that there is consent, and there's consent of a significant majority. Now, I'm not saying that all consent. You would say, "Hey, I don't consent. I'm paperback right here. I don't consent." But I think that that's true of all laws, right? It would be hard to find anyone who consents to every single law all the time, right? So,
sure.
But that doesn't make that law non-consensual, societally.
Okay, well...
if I find one person in 300 million that says this law, I don't agree with it, right? So in that case, is that law, somehow defying their rights? It just seems absurd to me.
Yeah, it is.
Wait, but
the smallest minority is an individual.
No,
if
I'm
you're
not
violating the rights of an individual, even just one person, you're still violating the rights of an individual.
That's what I'm saying, though, is I wouldn't classify taxation as a violation of a right. If anything, I would say it is the mechanism by which all other rights are granted. Without taxation, you can't grant other rights.
Okay, two things there. First of all, our rights don't come from the government. Our
rights
are not granted to us by the
government. I never said that they were. I'm just saying that because we say we live in the real world, right? So in the real world,
maybe we're just disagreeing about your wording. Instead of saying, taxation is how all other rights are granted, I think I would agree if you said taxation is how all other rights are, protected.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I can say the word protected, sure, because I agree with you that taxation is not the source of the right, but like the shield that keeps it in place.
All right, well, that's a rather different thing. But go on, I interrupted you.
Okay, no, that was basically it. So like I mentioned, I guess all my points there. I'm trying to meet you even halfway, but I don't see why you don't see taxation as this, freedom, if anything, right? Like
Okay,
it's a
well,
freedom, right?
all right, there's a lot to unpack there, so bear with me. To start with, taxation is not freedom because, when you have, goes back to what we were talking about with the governments having, less money, more money. If the government takes money from me and I have less money, I have less freedom. I am not as free to do what I would have done otherwise.
Wait, I need you to prove that point. So, like, give me a scenario. The government doesn't tax you and you're more free. Because I just don't see that.
All right. The government doesn't tax me, and now, as a result, I have more money. And,
but I come and rob you. What do you do?
I have more. All right. The government doesn't tax me. I have an extra $1,000 in my pocket, and because of that, I'm able to afford an extra. Let's just be absurd, hyperbolic. I'm able to afford an extra $1,000 of ammunition, and I'm so better able to protect my life as a result, making me more free.
Okay, and let's say that that's true, but at a certain point, given that there's no government taxation of theft, right? Someone with superior ammunition to you would subjugate you. Would that not be the case?
Well, all right, but what stops me from voluntarily arranging with other individuals a mutual defense agreement?
No, yeah, and you could 100% you could totally do that, but I'm just saying, like, in that world where you're voluntarily agreeing to mutual defense agreements with other people, would you honestly think you would be freer than the world we live in now, where there are cops and judges and laws?
For a very simple reason. With taxation, I have no say, or very little say, in how much money the government takes from me, whether the government takes money from me, and on what that money is spent. With voluntary agreements, let's just say the government taxes me $1,000 a month for military defense, and under anarchy, I also pay $1,000 a month for defense. But I'm more free to control how that money is spent and what amount is spent in the anarchic system than under the statist system.
I agree that you have more control over the spending, but how do you create a voluntary agreement with the country of Canada or the country of China? In this world, I've just plopped you into this world. There's no government. You've got this extra money, and I'm seeing you trying to make treaties and trying to make agreements to protect yourself.
I wouldn't make a treaty with Canada.
Well,
go to my neighbors and say, hey, the Canadians are coming after us. We gotta pool our resources voluntarily and find a way to arrange our defense, and you're free to put money into my pool, which I'm going to put towards the Halliburton Defense Company, or you're free to spend it how you want.
And you would get devastated, right? Like you would get any government on earth would be able to overwhelm your little militia. Is that not
necessarily? I don't think.
Okay. That is so absurd. China comes in, and you're saying you're able to defend yourself from the Chinese government with your ragtag team of 30 people? How?
No.
How? Like, that's laughable.
Oh, this is a question of geography now. Am I living in Hong Kong in this?
You can be living anywhere you want. If you don't have a government shield, how do you protect yourself from other governments? What is Paperback doing? How is Paperback more free? That whole contention you made is not true.
Gone back into the defense question. Let's take it back to taxation being a form of freedom.
Okay, so I'm arguing that
takes my resources from me without my consent.
Yes.
That makes me less free. I am less able to navigate the world because I now have less resources.
That in and of itself is not true, because in the world where you have full control over your resources, you have no government to protect you. And now you're saying, okay, let's allow
that you need a government to protect you.
So Paperback, I don't understand. Like, you're just you and 20, 30 other people. How are you going to defend yourself from other governments? Like, what are you going to do?
buy military equipment.
Oh my
Hire a
god.
defense
Okay,
company.
that's just
No,
okay,
it wouldn't
that's just
be us 30
hilarious.
people.
Oh
No,
my
it
God.
wouldn't be us 30 people.
You know what's
Private
funny?
Military companies have existed, do exist.
You know what's funny is that you pooling your resources together is a form of taxation.
No, it isn't, because the critical part of taxation is it's done without your consent.
So
It's
what?
taken from you regardless.
So all that you've
Okay,
done
well,
is
wait a minute,
you've
wait a minute
consented
now.
to a new tax. That's all you've done.
No,
It's still taxation.
No, wait a minute. So, wait a minute. Insurance companies are pooling resources together.
Yes, yeah.
Do you voluntarily pay into life insurance?
No, well, I'm not. Yeah, you're right. I'm not mandated. I'm not mandated to pay into life
Okay,
insurance.
my
You're
question
right.
is, I phrased it poorly. Do you have a life insurance policy?
Through my work, yes, but not
Okay,
not a
so you
private
do,
one that
you
I've
do.
bought. Yes,
Well, no,
yeah.
that's not really important, because you're nevertheless pooling your resources with other people.
Yes,
But you're
yes.
voluntarily agreeing to, I mean, you're not paying money, but the money that your employer's spending on this insurance company could be put into your paycheck if they
Yeah.
want. to
If
put
you
it
want,
into the-
for the sake of the argument, we can assume that I've paid for
Yeah.
one. Sure, let's just do
It
that.
simplifies things.
Sure, sure.
So you're pooling your resources with other people, saying, "Hey, if I die prematurely, there will be, a payment to my survivors. But if I don't die prematurely, I'm going to go on paying monthly premiums, and it'll go out to other people who do die prematurely." That's pooling your resources to achieve a common end. But would you
Yes.
say that your life insurance payment is a tax?
If it involves buying weaponry to protect myself from a government, then those would be taxes paid for defense in the form of weapons, tanks, nuclear weapons, etc. I would argue that would be a tax. Yes.
All right, hang on. I was asking specifically about, you're equating any time that
I mean,
people
that's-
pay money to pool their resources together. Doesn't matter what. That's a tax.
Well, that because I remember we started this discussion off with you are freer because you pay taxes. If you stop paying taxes and we allowed the government to fall into anarchy, we would be less free. And you said, no, I wouldn't be less free. I would have all this excess capital. And I said, yes, you would. What would you do with the excess capital? And you said,
Taxes are just one part of the.
well, let me finish.
equation.
Let me finish
Go
your
ahead,
argument.
go ahead.
Your argument said, oh, I would take this extra capital, I would pool it with other people, like your life insurance analogy, and then all of us together, we would be able to protect ourselves from the Chinese government. At which point I laughed, and I said that is hilarious.
Because there would be multiple competing defense companies. That's the difference.
But
Government is a monopoly. You have no choice about whether the government takes your money. They do, whether you want to or not. And then you have no choice about whether your money goes to the U.S. federal government, or maybe Canada's got a better, let's, for sake of argument, let's ignore the real world Canada, but maybe, all right, forget Canada, maybe the U.K. has a better national defense program. And you would say, I would rather the British military defend my home than the United States military. You don't get that choice, because the U.S. government takes your money regardless, and they will spend a certain percentage of it on the military, over which you have very little control. And you can't say, no, I'd rather give to, Spence, Paperback Writers Military Company because they're proven to be more efficient, they're less wasteful, et cetera, et cetera. You don't get that choice. In the anarchic system, there would be competing services where to get your protection dollars, the money that you're willing to spend on military defense, they have to prove they are effective at defense, that they're efficient with your money, all the normal things that a private company has to do to earn your dollar.
But you agree that this is a fairy tale as similar as Harry Potter, like spells and wizardry, because
no, I don't.
because in this world, in this world
today, in certain parts of the world, it's
because if such a thing existed and such a land was sought after by a government, there would be nothing that group of people could do to stop that government from taking that land and taking that wealth. There's nothing that anyone could do.
Which government? Because not all governments are created equal. I'm very confident that
okay,
if
let's
a
say
bunch of Americans...
No, let's say America wanted a piece of land, and
The United States government, you mean?
Yeah, let's say America wanted a piece of land, and that piece of land was an anarchist, perfect, harmonious society.
And Kapistan, sure.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't have to be America. Like I said, it could be China, it could be Russia.
Right.
My contention is that the overwhelming force of a government is is not able to be taken lightly. Like, I feel like you don't understand the force implied here. Like, somehow
you're not giving credence to the countervailing force of, people saying, hey, private military company or multiple private military companies come and defend us.
Okay, how about this?
You're
if there's an island, I nuke it. How would you protect yourself from the nuke?
How would the U.S. government protect us from a nuke?
You mean, right?
If the Russians, launched a nuclear weapon at San Francisco right now, how would the U.S. government save my life?
Mutually assured destruction. That's what keeps us safe.
That doesn't save my life.
No, it does. Actually, it prevents your life from dying. As we speak,
but I'm saying
mutually assured destruction protects us.
You just said that on the island where the anarchists live, a government drops a nuke on.
Yeah, but
you've skipped the question of how do you prevent that. You've just said it happened.
Oh, okay. How would this island dwellers be able to get a nuke long enough to defend itself? Because I would agree with you. If you could fall into anarchy and in quick enough time get nuclear capabilities, I would agree that at that point you have an ICBM, you could nuke any country on Earth. You would have the relevant strength to be independent. I would 100% agree with you. I think that is a laughable fairy tale that is not possible. There's no way we're gonna fall into anarchy and there's gonna be groups of us that are gonna have like ICBM capabilities. That's
North
hilarious.
Korea is one of the most impoverished places in the world. They have a nuclear weapon. Don't you think that if
but North Korea is a government though? It's not a ragtag group of 30 people.
No, but it's a government that's extremely poor.
But a poor government can destroy any ragtag group of 20 people. Well, because it's a government. I mean, governments, and it steals. If you didn't know, they're one of the few countries that. Yeah. But again, you're.
Did they steal plutonium? I mean, was this like Back to the Future?
No, they synthesized it. They synthesized it in their nuclear reactors.
Okay, but that costs money. Where did they get the money to do that?
So 20 to 30 people would never be able to fund a nuclear reactor. Okay, believe it or not, the DPRK did fund that.
Things to like 20 to 30 people, but let's put that to one side for a minute. My point is that
it's important. That's the key issue is that you don't have.
No, but it wouldn't just be 20 to 30 people.
Well, how many people?
My life insurance.
I know, but how would you?
Insurance companies arrange collective risk mitigation for millions, sometimes tens of millions of people. The same scale could be achieved with competing private military companies.
So what you forget is the reason why life insurance and a number of different instruments are available is because we have laws and order. It's the same thing why you're able to drive on the freeways with your car and on roads. The reason why traffic moves quickly and other things go quickly is because there's laws and order. If there were no traffic laws or lines or order, traffic would move much slower. One of the reasons we can go fast is because there's order.
Studies that show that roads with fewer road signs are actually safer.
But that's one minutia. That's road signs. Road signs are not. You can't. No. You can't make an analogy of road signs to removing all road laws.
Not just road signs, but also. Well, but that's the thing. Laws. All right. People behave on the road a certain way. They act towards self-preservation. Now, some people don't do this. There are reckless drivers, but most people don't drive around thinking, I want to get into a wreck, or I'm going to drive dangerously and don't care if I get into a wreck.
Is it not easy?
You could get rid of the road laws, and people would still drive a certain way, and probably the same way they do right now.
It's very simple for you to drive from it's 6-7 hours, so it's not too simple, but to go from San Francisco to Los Angeles, because we have these laws and these nice highways and everyone really knows what the rules are, you're able to move quickly, right? Now imagine
this is just the classic statist fallacy where you say, because I can't imagine a world where the government didn't create roads, therefore such a world must not be possible.
No, I'm giving. You can move here quickly. Now watch the alternative. Let's say I'm able to wipe all the roads away, right? And it's just dirt as far as you can see from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Do you think that you would, with 30 million other people in California, be able to get to Los Angeles from San Francisco in that type of world where there's no roads, there's no laws, everything is just dirt everywhere, as opposed to what we have now where there's roads, laws? My whole point, and this is what a lot of legal people, scholars mention this too, laws and rules allow things to move quickly. Economies move quickly with laws and rules. Trading with finance and other things, instruments move quickly.
Your mistake is assuming that rules can only come from the government. You're not thinking that people making voluntary arrangements can reach a conclusion about rules and customs.
I would 100% agree with that, and that people can. That's true. But I guess where we disagree is that governments are necessary evils, because where certain things like roads and other things, that's probably something we could handle if we had to, right? Defense is an item that could not be handled by people negotiating in good faith with one another. That's just a fairy tale. Like, you need a government to do so.
I actually don't think that's true.
Well, then, show me how it would happen. Tomorrow it's anarchy, right? Boom. What do? Go.
All right. Well,
so day one's tomorrow.
Do we have an economy in this scenario?
I mean, you can't not have an economy. Like, that's not possible. There would always be an economy. Yeah. So tomorrow.
All right. So there are private companies that exist, right? Forget about private companies. There are people who work for an organization. They know other people who work for the same organization, and they know other people who they do business with.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So wouldn't they immediately say, "Oh my gosh, there's no cops anymore. We need to beef up our private security"?
Sure. Yeah, they probably would want some private security. Yeah, for sure.
All right. And similarly, you've heard of these things called gated communities, right?
Yeah, there'd probably be more of those for sure.
Right. Now the government's not taking 25-30% of your income. Would it not follow then that a lot of people would say, "Oh, the government's gone, there's no cops anymore, let me talk with our neighbors, let's hire a private security guard, let's maybe throw up some fences and create a gated community"?
So the problem with your argument is that in a week from today, so today's the 8th of February, by the 15th of February, whatever defenses you managed to scrounge together would be overwhelmed by a competing government. And you would have nothing that you could do, and the idea that you could is hilarious.
This magical thought experiment where you've made the U.S. government disappear. Why can't other governments also disappear?
Okay, so I mean, again, that doesn't get us anywhere, because what ends up happening is all governments disappear, and then all governments reappear. You don't get any. You don't make any progress. What ends up happening?
Be specific. In the Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area, the U.S. federal government's gone, the state of California government's gone, the L.A. county government's gone, and the city government is gone. Which government is going to come in and overwhelm your land? And by what date? And by what method?
I was specific. I told you all of America. I gave you specific borders, whatever the American borders are.
Your specific area. Which government from around the world is going to come to your street and overwhelm you specifically?
So, I mean, it hasn't happened. It's hypothetical, but I would say any government.
And then tell me
China,
not which government, but how they would do this. All right,
China, Canada, Mexico, anyone. Mexico.
Okay, so let's start with them.
Yeah.
Trading partners of the United States. Why are they going to invade a country that they previously have had friendly relations to?
So, one scenario I could think of is that Canada could see. Look, I'm using Canada because they're nicer. You know, Mexico might say, "Oh, we just want our land back." Right? So I'm trying to give you the most generous example I can. So Canada could say, "Oh, you know what? We see that America's government just fell. We understand that it was consensual. We think that this is not in the best interest of their people. We actually think that this is we think that this is."
Actually, excuse me. I'm sorry. That sounded sarcastic, but I actually do think this is realistic. Where, especially under Trudeau, the Canadian government would say it's not in the best interests of the people, even though they just decided to have anarchy. So
exactly. Yeah, as you know, it becomes a bit of a nanny state, right? So that they come in and they're like, you know what, for your own protection, we're not gonna do anything. We're just gonna provide some defensive troops, right? And they're gonna spend a year putting troops throughout the country, right? And I would say through a slow, gradual crawl, what was the United States would then become Canada. And I think through propaganda,
38 million people.
Yes.
325 million.
Yes.
What is Canada going to enlist every man, woman, and child in their military and turn them into
soldiers? Are you familiar with
police officers?
Are you familiar with Sykes-Picot, the treaty?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so something similar, but not. So I think you're forgetting that there are major actors in the world, right? So what Canada would do is say, hey, you know what? This is a lot for us to bite off. Like we don't want to take like New Mexico, Arizona. Like we don't even want that. But you know what? We like Washington a lot. We really like.
They carve up spheres of influence with other countries in the former United States.
Exactly.
All right, now let's
Sykes-Picot 101, my man.
Right, let's focus in on the Canadian spheres of influence. How do the Canadians take over and subjugate Seattle?
Like I said, first they come in as saviors. They come in with propaganda. They just an army just standing there. Just again, this is
How do they begin
one scenario.
taxing Americans? How do they begin confiscating the wealth of Americans and telling Americans this is what you must do? How do they do that? How do they impose their will on the day-to-day life of the average American?
How does anyone do that? By threat of violence, right? At a certain point, threat of violence will happen.
A foreign power, in Seattle, threatening violence against Americans, and you don't think?
Well, they're not. No. At this point, they're not. Remember, America has been abolished. They're Seattleans, whatever that is called. They're Seattleans.
They live on the American continent. They're Americans, all right? They're former...
Okay, well then Canadians would then be Americans too.
They're freedmen, all right?
Okay, that's hilarious. Okay, I think there's sometimes we get too... But my whole point is we're just wasting our time here. Paperback, I think we both just need to agree the reasonable option is you cannot withstand the overwhelming force of a government.
I think you can.
Okay,
and you're not explaining to me in detail.
I just
how
did.
How does a foreign government...
Threat of violence. There are guns. There are missiles. There are bombs. There are tear gas. It doesn't have to be guns day one. It could be tear gas and troops day one. It could be rubber bullets day two.
Afghanistan.
Does the United States what?
Does the United States control Afghanistan?
No. The Taliban controls Afghanistan, ironically.
All right. But wait a minute now. You just said that, you would never be able to resist the might of a government. How then have the Taliban, some guys in sandals with AK-47s, how have they managed to resist the overwhelming might of the United States government?
Well, no, you're absolutely correct. The Taliban have resisted our efforts, but they don't have any land that they like they're not like taxing people with their military that you can go and attack easily. Like it's often just guerrilla warfare and it's all hidden. It's all covert.
The average Afghan person is loyal to the United States and follows the edicts of the government of the United States?
Aren't they loyal to the? I guess it would depend, but like to their own government, right? The Afghan government, unless they were probably in a city that was loyal to the Taliban, which there are some of those too.
That's right.
So I guess it would depend on what city they're in, but I don't think any of the cities would follow the edicts of America. No.
Okay, but why is that? When government, we have a government with overwhelming might. We have military boots on the ground in Afghanistan.
Are you arguing that we want to annex Afghanistan and they're somehow defending themselves from us?
Sorry, hang on, my dog's barking.
No, it's okay. Maybe he wants to.
Let me just. Yeah,
I'll be right back. We'll do a quick pause.
Hello? Ready whenever you are, just in case you're there. Dog, I know you don't like being manhandled. There.
All right, I'm back. Oh, there's a feedback from your mic.
Ah.
Oh, there you are.
Hello?
Yep. I'm back.
Broadsword calling Danny boy.
Are you back? Ready?
Broadsword calling Danny boy.
Where's that from? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hang on, let me...
I'll keep talking, and then hopefully that'll help. I cannot hear you, but it shows that you're talking.
Yeah, it muted me somehow. I'm like, no, I checked on the Twitch link live streams. That probably messed up my settings.
Oh yeah, that'll do it. Actually, yeah.
I can hear you now.
Your dog sounded awesome, by the way. It reminded me. I have a friend who they have to put down their cat and they've had it for like 12 years. It's just there's nothing any of the doctors can do, so they're kind of broken today.
Oh, it just happened.
Yeah, like literally today, early in the morning.
Oh, don't say that. My dog's getting old. The time is approaching, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Not like imminently, but he's got more years behind him than ahead of him.
Yeah, that sucks. I'm sorry, dude.
Well, he's on my lap now, so maybe I'll be a little more calm. My therapeutic comfort animal to help me get through these times of struggle.
Oh, I think you've been super calm in general. Do you mean in life?
I'm having fun. No. I mean, no, not life. All life is a struggle. Anyone who says otherwise is selling something. No. I just mean this has been fun. I've been enjoying it. Let's keep going if you want to.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. I wanted to do this. I speak with people I disagree with all the time, right? But I wanted to do this because I'm like,
healthy.
Yeah, I was reading your stuff, and I'm like, this guy's very well read, I was like, I couldn't relate some of the points that I guess you had made. So I was like, this is open to discussion. Whereas some people, like, I'll see their writing, and I'm like, oh, that person just hasn't read anything, so to speak. They don't know the numbers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess since we took a little break, we could go back to the original discussion of debt and deficits.
It's your choice.
I want to actually. We keep veering off into the question of collective defense, which I've already conceded. I think is that's an open question. I would put to you that it is possible in some areas right now in the world as it exists today to have an anarcho-capitalist system and be able to defend themselves, but in other places it would not be possible.
I can propose something else, but it's technically your go if you want to. I can give you an example,
right.
For instance.
I would say let's move off of collective defense for the moment and go back to taxation is theft, because I think we got derailed without getting to the meat of the subject.
So I was going to say we could talk about, I guess, an area I'm more familiar with, which would be like regulating drugs. We won't talk about defense. But I mean, what are your thoughts on the FDA, CDC, so to speak? How libertarian are you in that sense?
I think something like the CDC would probably exist even without government. That university, we have private universities, obviously, and they do a lot of research. Some of it funded by the government, some of it not. I think the CDC as a government institution. Honestly, I think that's one of those things where it probably could be funded voluntarily, because people, if you say, what do you think about the CDC? People say, oh, it's good. They help prevent smallpox or whatever. But as for the FDA, I think that's an evil institution that is costing lives every single year.
Oh. Okay, you got to tell me about that one. And again, it's you don't have to. It's your choice. So whatever you want to talk about, it's your go.
I think we can handle this one briefly, and I do want to get back to the taxation theft discussion. So the FDA, to market any prescription drug, and I think also over-the-counter drugs, there's some. Maybe you can tell me a bit about like when is something not a drug. Like if you have a homeopathic remedy, it doesn't need to get approval from the FDA, but I'm a bit fuzzy on like.
So, ironically, this is my strong suit. Yeah, like it's so for something to be marketed, there are exceptions. So a good example is supplements. For the longest time, supplements.
Yeah, yes, that's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah, so supplements in the 90s. This is because there was a law that was passed by Congress. Had that law not been passed, they would be regulated just as anything else. So if a supplement said like this can help you sleep better, that would have to be regulated by the FDA, and the FDA would clamp down hard if there weren't enough data, I guess, to support that. As it currently stands, because of the Republicans' efforts in the 90s, supplements can say whatever they want, essentially, as long as they are medicinal supplements and they brand themselves as such. They usually have a warning label that's mandated by law, like the statements in this have not been evaluated by the FDA, blah blah blah. Right? That's kind of a giveaway that this is a supplement. And yeah, they can. And well, the problem with that is people are dying and getting sick year after year by improperly laced supplements, partly because the FDA has literally no hand in it. They don't have the authority to regulate it.
All right, well, I was about to say, is this not unquestionably a good thing, where individuals are able to control what they put into their body and are able to get valuable supplements to their health. And some people, of course, make bad decisions, as human beings always do, but that's on their head. Is that not unquestionably a good thing that the government stepped back and let the market decide?
I think that certain claims, like with supplements, right? Like there's wherewithal and leeway. But I mean, if a supplement says that it cures cancer, immediately it would like fall within the purview of the FDA. They would get slapped down. I think like that's necessary, needed. Otherwise, I don't think the layperson can actually figure it out. I think the layperson is not an expert. I mean, going back to you, Paperback, do you believe in such a thing as expertise, whether it be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, etc., etc.?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Expertise exists.
So, I mean, is the opinion of a layperson equivalent to that of, a professional?
Oh, you cut out. Could you repeat that? Equivalent to what?
To a professional, sorry.
I mean, I assume you mean a professional doctor, right?
Oh, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer,
Okay, well, yeah, I would be quite happy to concede that on such matters as engineering or law or medicine, that people who've studied this for a very long time, who are genuine experts, yes, their opinion holds more weight and is often more valid than that of an average person. Stipulating, of course, that they can always make mistakes too. They can get it wrong sometimes.
Okay, given that such a thing as expertise and professionalism exists, and it takes quite a while to gain that. There's people who've tried to take the bar exam in California and have failed year after year after year. They don't have what it takes for one reason or another. To allow those people's, I guess, conclusions to just live, moving forward, they'd probably create a lot of mistakes, whether it be medicine. If you ask them to make a bridge, they probably make mistakes. So my whole point is, you can give people that freedom, right? But there could be quite significant consequences by doing so.
I think we're talking about two different things here, which is that on the point of supplements specifically, and drugs in general, it's your body, it's your choice. If you want to put a supplement in your body that claims to cure cancer, well, that's your decision and you should be free to make it. Even if it's unquestionably, even from a layperson standpoint, a dumb decision.
But I mean, how would a layperson know that it doesn't cure cancer? It would be tough, right?
Well, it doesn't. They can refer to other experts. I mean, again, I recognize that there is such a thing as expertise. But, it should not be the case that one expert gets to decide everything for everyone. It should not be the case that there's a monopoly on expertise. A layperson should be able to say, I've got cancer, I'm going to consult with multiple experts and go with the one that I think is best for me.
Let's go into the minutia. So you consult with the expert, and the expert says, yeah, actually, this is good for XYZ. And so you go ahead, you end up buying this company's supplement. Because it's unregulated by the FDA, you end up finding out that this company is not a good supplier of medications. They improperly source their raw materials, and as a result, you end up with lead poisoning. You could get permanent brain damage, and there's nothing you can do. There's no way to fix it. You can't even sue because you're at a point where, and you know what's weird is let's say the company.
Why can't I sue?
I'm significant brain damage. It's hard for you to think.
So in this scenario, I have no survivors, no power of attorney?
I mean, I'm sure you might have some people. Let's assume, I guess, you don't have kids, so maybe you have brothers, sisters, whatnot.
Right.
You go to sue. There's an investigation. You end up finding out that the company did not do this, willingly. They just made one bad call, one bad order, one bad provider, right? And it wasn't even them; it was a contractor that gave them this bad material. The court says, we understand. This makes sense. This was a bad contractor. This was a bad instance. You've banned that contractor. So be it. We don't find the company at fault. It's like, what do you do?
The contractor at fault, and the contractor owes me or my survivors restitution.
And let's say you go for that, the contractor goes bankrupt, and you get a marginal amount because the contractor didn't have much money to do it.
How is the contractor able to go bankrupt? It's by government bankruptcy laws. The government has enabled this contractor to get away with an act of malfeasance and then jilt the people that it owes restitution to.
I mean, I'm saying it's going bankrupt because there would be so many claims, so many people who are hurt that it would be impossible for this small contractor to pay out enough for everyone.
Well, if that's your point, then I would agree. Sure, that
this guy gets 10 grand.
Shoddy products goes out of business.
Yeah.
And the people that it harmed get some restitution, but probably not as much as they're owed.
Yep.
And that sucks, but we live in a fallen world where bad things do happen. Sometimes good people have bad things happen to them. That's true under the government system as well. So,
because thank God, we did not. We don't live by, I guess, the libertarian standards.
Oh, the FDA is God now?
No. I'm saying thank God that's not the case. We don't just accept this. There are preventative ways to delay this. So you might say, well, what could you do? Well, that contractor would need to be vetted ahead of time. Besides being vetted, there would need to be certain manufacturing runs that were approved. Once those manufacturing runs were approved, they'd look at their sourcing arrangements and figure out like exactly where are they sourcing these from, what are the certification. Basically, there's a lot of vetting. The equivalent to this would be like codes for building, right? Like building codes, right? People come in before they allow the whole building to be filled with apartments and tenants. There's other people that come in and check, is this building to code? Once that seal is given off, then people are allowed to come in and live and whatnot. So in the world, I guess, that you kind of drew, it is quite bleak, but it's not inevitable. In the world we live in now, we have checks that, gatekeepers, so to speak, that make it so that, we don't end up with, millions of people going blind, whatnot, getting brain damage, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, well, that's true, but those policies have costs. Okay.
Yes, they're quite expensive.
There is only trade-offs.
Yes, they're quite
expensive.
expensive.
What we're making is that we're saying we need to control things before bad things happen. We need to vet contractors and drug makers before they begin making drugs. And that's fine. That's going to prevent a certain amount of harm. You're correct. But that's also going to cause a certain amount of harm. Specifically, to cite a real-world example, drugs in the United States generally take a lot longer to get approval to be marketed than compared to other countries like in Europe. And as a result,
that's not true.
Okay, well, I can provide evidence of that.
I mean, you can, but this is my my field of expertise. To get from a protocol for a study. So first there's this thing called an STD, or a study concept document. It's like a pre-protocol. Then it goes to a protocol, which is like an official discussion of like, hey, this is exactly the clinical trial, I guess, that we're going to do, right? And then there's a million other steps. You eventually have to have sites activated to do the clinical trial. You have first subject enrolled, first subject dosed, last subject enrolled, that whole pipeline. We call that the clinical trial drug manufacturing pipeline, or drug development pipeline. That is not significantly slower in America. That is quite equivalent across the board around the world. That's one of the reasons we created something called the ICH, or the International Conference on Harmonization. We tried to get as many laws to match from one country to another, so that if I was launching a drug in Japan, or I was launching a drug in Australia or the Europe, I could try to go faster because the laws would be equivalent. We haven't gotten there. There's no worldwide standard, but it's getting better year after year, and there's ends up being similarities year after year. But no, this idea that in America to start from a clinical trial and get to marketing and approval, it's longer than in Europe with like the EMEA, the European Medicines Association. Or in Japan, that's patently not true.
All right, sources I have say it takes an average of 12 years for a new drug to come to market in the United States.
Yeah, it depends on the drug, but that number is correct, between 10 to 15, right. Sometimes 20 years. But it depends on the drug, obviously.
What is the equivalent of What's the equivalent in Europe?
It's equivalent, and the way I know is because a lot of studies are done worldwide. I manage studies myself, and we have European arms and we have American arms, and the reason we do that is you're able to enroll sick patients in quicker. There's only so many patients with the sickness that you're looking for in America, so one way to do a clinical trial really quickly is to do clinical trials in Europe, do them in Australia, do them globally, and I work for a company that has the financial wherewithal to do that. My studies in Europe do not go faster than my studies in America and whatnot. So yeah, it's true that it takes a long time, but it's just as long, 10 to 15, 20 years in Europe.
All right, look, I'll concede to your expertise, to use your word, but the point remains that there is a centralized government approval process through which drug companies have to go before they can bring a drug.
Yes. It's very exhausting, actually. So to give you an example, they say for every taxable dollar, I think 15 to 20 cents of it goes to regulations needed for the FDA. Like, it's a huge amount of money to regulate food and drugs.
But that is my point. Is that
I agree.
Governments are imposing a delay on bringing sometimes life-saving drugs to market.
Yes.
And that there are individual people out there who are sick and would say, I'm dying, or maybe I'm not dying, but I've got an unpleasant condition. I'm willing to take a risk on some unproven drug that maybe will kill me, or maybe it'll disable me, or maybe it'll make me better. That's my choice. I want to make that choice, and the government prevents them from doing so.
That is not true. So up until now,
well, that changed recently with the right to try legislation. But it is generally true because that right to try legislation, as I understand it, only applies to life-saving drugs or potentially life-saving drugs and terminal illnesses.
Yes, exactly.
But
So
if you have a condition like arthritis, for example, no one's going to say that arthritis is a life-threatening condition.
Yeah, so you wouldn't be able to right to try.
It can absolutely ruin your life.
Yes.
Are you really going to tell me that it's a good thing that the FDA is telling potentially millions of people, no, you have to live in crippling pain every single day because for your own good, we don't want you getting poisoned by a drug which may or may not be, pure?
I'll tell you why they're doing it.
A moral position to take.
I'll tell you why, and I think it's because there's a perspective you haven't heard that might help you here. So because I'm with you 100% of the way. Yes, if a person wants to do that, but you're missing a very important perspective that, like, institutional review boards, ethics committees, we've kind of had these discussions. The perspective that you're missing, and it's okay, like, you're not a professional, is that if we did move ahead and we did say, okay, if anyone wants to try anything, go ahead, you're missing the fact that there are gigantic, very powerful billion-dollar companies, like companies that could shift whole governments, right? And they want these drugs approved. They want data. They want it so bad. And not all of them are the fairest actors, right? Because it's capitalism. It's like, sometimes it's whatever you need to do to get the money, right? These actors are amoral. They're not immoral. They're not moral. They are amoral. These companies could devise pipelines to bring people in, market to them, and be like, hey, we have XY idea. We have this new right to try legislation for arthritis. We really think you should try it. Come on down. And the floodgates to manipulation of people en masse would open.
Okay. Well, people are liable to be manipulated, but that's on each individual. Buyer beware.
100%, you are correct. So the only difference is that those companies who would want to do it, they would need to go to the FDA, show some level of data, and if they do, they have things like compassionate use, which my company and other companies do, where people can say, look, I'm willing to take the risk, and you can get an emergency IND, an emergency investigation new drug application.
But why should I have to do any of that? Why can't I, as an individual who needs a drug, just say, hey, I've got money, you've got a drug, give me your drug and I'll give you this money?
Because you don't understand the influence that gigantic company could do to...
Okay, well, maybe I've been influenced. Why can't I say, hey, Coca-Cola is telling me that their product's going to cure cancer, I want to buy it. Who are you to stop me?
I would agree that it is quite nanny state-like, as far as individual freedoms.
There.
But
I'm asking you, on what moral basis can you, a third-party person,
expertise.
say, no,
expertise.
Okay.
It's exactly what we started the discussion on. That there are certain.
So you believe that people who know better
Yes.
should get to tell others what to do.
Yes, and they always have.
You also believe then that yes, I can know what is best for someone else. I can know it better than what they think for themselves.
I think that if you got very, very skilled doctors and you got them in a room and there was a company that said, look, we think that that this is a risky drug, but that this drug could be given to the public, so to speak, right? That those doctors spending some time, a few months, looking at the data is worthwhile, a mandatory requirement to kind of stop the floodgates, and all those doctors would say, oh yeah, you know what, day looks good, okay, go ahead. Now, I know you don't want to do that. Well, before you go, I know you don't want to do that check, but it's not like that's a 10-year check. It's literally 2 to 6 months, and now, then those people can get in.
Why can't this arrangement be voluntary? Why does it have to be done through the government? Why can't you take your expertise and say, as a voluntary trade association with, all the drug companies get together and say, voluntarily, not with the government, we're going to agree to a certain set of standards where we determine, which drugs are acceptable for sale through our chain of stores, through our vendors, through our pharmacologists, et cetera, et cetera.
So why are you so, against the idea of the government acting as the entity in this case?
Well, it goes back to something we talked about earlier, which is, I'm not against rules, and I don't think that rules only have to come from the government. I'm very much in favor of rules. I just think that they're going to be, generally speaking, more effective and more efficient if they are conceived of in private voluntary transactions. And trade associations are a good example of that.
But couldn't I establish a trade association and then have people come to me and I give them false expertise and then take...
And how long do you think your trade association would hang together while it's committing fraud?
It's similar to the issue with Vioxx. Like, Vioxx, a lot of people said, oh, they did X or Y mistakes and, oh, they're going to pay for it. Last I checked Merck's stock, they didn't pay very much. The cost associated to the companies is low. The cost associated to the individual is very high, sometimes life-threatening. So yeah. I don't think that those costs...
Okay, so what's the cost to the government when it makes a decision that gets people killed?
When you say the government, in my head I hear one thing and I think you hear another thing. In my head I hear the people acting in an organized manner, because the government's not some alien...
Well, okay, we're going to need to pin down that definition then.
But I don't think it's some alien, race from Mars who makes decisions. Okay, it's just the people of America.
The Coca-Cola company acts together. That's people acting together. That's not a government. What makes a government is the lawful initiation of force.
Yes.
On violence.
So it would be people coming together in an organized manner, and then these people...
And using violence to tell other people what they can and can't do.
These people would have the threat of violence, exactly. And then you can go into, so then why should these people have the threat of violence and Coca-Cola not get into the threats of violence? And then we talk about, well, we're a republic, and we've created the republic, it's a representative democracy. We would get, you know all this stuff, right? It wouldn't get anywhere.
Hang on, I lost my train of thought. How did we get on to, said immediately before...
The thing is, you were kind of trying to...
I say government, you hear something else, and I...
So, okay, I think the difference between us is, I'm a mixed marketer. So the way I look at the world is, here's something that we want to bring into the world. Should it be privatized? Should it be held by society or socialized, right? I think whatever is in the best interest of people, that's how it should go. So a good example is, I think if someone's going to make iPods or something, I think that should be privatized. Another example would be prisons. I don't think that there should be private prisons. I think that there's a moral failing when we have private prisons. There's a profit motive there. That
let me stop you from going further. Let's just examine this real quickly. What's the moral failing about private prisons specifically, as opposed to government-run prisons? I
think that a private prison, let's say it ends up, and actually this isn't, let's say, there are the was it CCCA or whatever, the Corrections Corporation of America. It is traded, I believe. I think it's publicly traded. Let me double check.
Okay.
CCA.
But my specific question is, what's the moral failing of private prisons compared to public prisons? I mean, the way you say it would make me think that, well, if private prisons are immoral, then wouldn't government-run prisons also be immoral?
Oh, I guess I didn't get into why they were immoral. So, they're immoral because they have a profit incentive to maximize as much as they can the share and the wealth to their investors, their different associates, right?
But
And that doesn't.
The government also have a profit incentive to
No,
prisons to make
no.
people sponsor.
The government wants to lower costs as much as possible. They don't want a million prisoners.
Why? It's not the government's money; it's the taxpayers' money.
It is, but they don't. I mean, imagine you'd have to manage a larger and larger item. Then you would have to ramp up your own resources and give yourself a headache. At the end of the day, you wouldn't be able to keep any of the profits yourself, right? So like you can give yourself like $10 million bonuses like these private companies. So there's no genuine incentive but like let's turn on the other side, right? Let's think of a private company. They want to give themselves quarterly bonuses. They would love to be able to go and buy yachts. I mean, a lot of people would love to buy a nice car.
Well, I mean, isn't that true of everyone, regardless of whether they're working in government or the private sector?
Yeah, so how do you increase profit? And there's already been investigative journalists who've looked into it, where there's private companies who are bribing judges to be able to increase the stock of prisoners in their prisons. There was one famous case where a judge was throwing juveniles into prison, and he was receiving kickbacks from a private prison. Okay. Again, if that private prison didn't exist...
Is that morally different than a legislature saying we're going to decrease the budget of judges, the salaries of judges in response to judges, being a little more harsh on prosecutors and being a little more friendly towards defendants?
I don't see the one-to-one with kickbacks there. Like the private company was giving kickbacks to increase the amount of people in their prisons, such that they could make. Like, I don't see the one-to-one with your example.
When you have traffic tickets, for instance, some of that money goes to the local government.
Yeah.
Is that and judges preside over the rulings. I mean, most places don't let you have a jury trial for a traffic offense. So, isn't there then an equivalent moral failing where judges get to impose penalties on people from which the judges directly benefit or indirectly benefit?
California agreed with you, Paperback, and that's why it's trying to remove cash bail. If you've been following the initiative, California did say that there is some sort of moral failing there. Cash bail is not
the same thing as a fine.
Yeah, the fines as well. So basically, if people are having... What ended up happening is people were becoming bankrupt, losing jobs from these fines. And so people would say, oh, but look at the fine. It's like $200. But then they would look at the person. The person couldn't pay that fine, was forced to go to jail. They lost their job. They got into more debt. They ended up staying in jail longer as a result. And it just created this impoverishment system. If anything, California agrees with you, and that's something that's being tackled currently.
Okay. Well, I didn't mean to get off on private prisons.
I don't know why are you defending private prisons. Why do you think prisons should be privatized?
Because why should the government not take advantage of the greater efficiency of the private sector to save taxpayer dollars?
You know what? I would agree 100% that potentially there would be some efficiency gained by the private companies, but you have to remember that there's efficiencies held by the government too. And you might say, what do you mean by that? So I'll give you specific examples. Administration is often, and you can look at any sort of administration, right? Cheaper with the government. Profit. There's no profit, right? So private prisons need to collect profit. When you remove profit from the I guess equation, that's a ton of money that's saved. So there are efficiencies for sure. Well, let me finish my point. I'm almost done. There are efficiencies for sure by going with the private market. That's why I'm a mixed marketer. There's things that the private market is really good at, but you kind of overlook the efficiencies that the government has with administration and with lack of profit. So like, if you take a company and you add up how much profit it has, the moment you socialize it, the profit just poofs. You don't need to pay profit or bonuses or anything like that.
Okay, well, the last thing this will be my final word on the subject before we move on. If you want to reply, that's fine. I would just say that, companies don't take profit, they make profit. Profit is revenue minus expenses.
I would agree with that.
So, okay, good.
I would 100% agree. But I'm just saying that would be unnecessary because that extra amount that they are making.
Right, well, that wasn't my whole statement. What I was going to go on to say was that the profit incentive is what keeps private companies accountable and is what drives them to be efficient. And absent the profit motive, the profit motive is still there, but absent the requirement to continue to make profits, the government can run a loss every single year and just continue to steal money. So in the absence of needing a profit, governments behave irresponsibly, inefficiently, and that's why you see, for instance, what do in California prison guards make in salary and benefits? It's a lot. It's a lot more than what private sector prisons pay out. It's also more than what government-run prisons pay their prison guards in other states as well.
I think if you were to look at employee payment rules en masse and just profit and that goes to individuals, and you would compare like just one prison that's publicly owned and a private prison, and you were to like compare them 1-to-1, I would actually disagree, and I would think that the private prison was giving more money to individuals than the public prison for sure.
Well, that's an objective question, and the people listening to this can find it out on their own time. I wanted to get back to the taxation is theft thing, which I don't think we ever quite wrapped up.
Yeah, but that was a good discussion. I guess you kind of saw more perspectives on why we don't do certain things and why there are certain, I guess, loopholes that people jump through. I don't want to get too much because we can go back, but there's other questions we can get into, like, why don't we just allow the sale of organs? And this was something that even I was for.
Well, why don't we?
I was actually pro sale of organs up until I became an expert in clinical trials. I gained my expertise. If you're curious, we can go into that before going into taxation.
I'm curious. Let's just make this a lightning round. Give me your argument for why the sale of organs should be. Do you think they should be the sale of organs should be criminal, restricted, what?
So I would refer people to the Belmont Report, which got its first, inclinations in the Treaty of Helsinki. In there, they talked about how there's this idea of justice, and if you allow people to sell organs, which is fine, like it's their organs, they can sell it. What ends up happening is people with more wealth are able to take advantage of people with less wealth, and the way you do that is you tell the people with more wealth, hey, here's take some of this wealth, give me your organ, and the people with less wealth will say, look, we're impoverished, we don't really have the ability to say no to this kind of money. Are you talking
about organs like kidneys where there's plenty to spare, but
yes,
or are you talking about like a rich person going and saying, I need a heart transplant, I want you to sell me one of your children so I can rip his heart out and put it in
I'm more talking about like kidneys, for instance, or actually like a part of a liver, because like livers regenerate.
Yeah,
so
regenerate the liver, sure.
Yeah, you want to keep.
I don't know if that's the clinical term, but
grows back. That is. It's just like I couldn't take 90% of your liver, but I could take a small amount, and Yeah, exactly.
As someone who is fond of craft beer, I'm depending on that being true.
So yeah, that's the idea, which is that it creates an undue burden on the impoverished, and it creates a set of incentives such that...
What's the burden? An undue burden of what?
It creates a set of incentives such that the wealthier classes are able to take advantage of their wealth to increase their, organ, the ability to obtain organs.
And what's wrong with that? You're saying rich people who have money give money to poor people, and poor people now have more money than they did before, and rich people now have longer, healthier lives.
Yes,
I'm failing to see the problem in this.
So yes, you're right that the poor people would then have more money, and then the rich people would then have the organ that they wanted. But you're forgetting it's a very idealistic foundation, which is that setting a system up such that the rich can take advantage of the poor and put themselves in this kind of stronger position, as opposed to the system that we have now, which is, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, like there's a limited amount of organs. You want one, you get in line. Rich, poor, black, white, Asian,
so you would rather
Caucasian.
have everyone be equally likely to die and suffer,
Yes.
and have everyone have worse health outcomes overall, than allow for some people who are richer than others to end up being better off.
Yeah, and the idea, and this
I mean,
this
how
goes
is
into
that not just? I mean, to be a little unfair, how is it not? Margaret Thatcher said something very famously where she said her opponents, the socialists, not accusing you of being a socialist, but her opponents would rather the poor were poorer as long as the rich were less rich. How is that not just the same principle but now applied to healthcare? You would rather the rich be. You would rather the poor be unhealthier or less healthy as long as the rich were also less healthy.
You make it seem like this is some sort of gateway for poor people to enter the wealthy classes, when it honestly wouldn't be.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that a poor person or a poor family in financial straits,
they would still be poor.
would have an additional resource to help them out.
Yeah, they would still be poor. A good example is
yeah, they would still be poor, but they would be less poor. Is that not better?
Well, you forget the flip side of that, which is then poor people needing organs would be unable to obtain them, and they would die en masse.
Well, they can't obtain them now.
No, they can. They can definitely obtain them now.
If they get lucky, if they wait in line and survive long enough.
Exactly. So now, in our current system, a poor person has a good chance of getting an organ. In the system that you are proposing, a poor person would be unable to get that organ.
But you're also assuming that poor people wouldn't be able to afford organs. I mean, there are twice as many kidneys on this planet than we need, give or take. Don't you think that if we allowed for the sale of organs, that prices would come down to affordable levels?
I mean, I don't have to assume. Iran is, I think, the only country that allows sale of organs, and
did not know that.
Yes, so we can look at them as like a test case, and I mean, like they would still be, it would be quite expensive to buy it. The poor, by definition of being poor, would just not get the organs that they need. It's not, I mean, it just makes perfect sense.
Sometimes people die and they don't get health care that they need. We live in a fallen world where bad outcomes abound.
I think that's sometimes the problem I have with libertarians, is that when we get to a point where there's like a very bleak outcome, instead of being like, oh, actually, so I can see that this is we shouldn't do this. This is a bad road. They kind of accept that road, but they're not willing to admit, like, I guess the road that we're on currently is superior. They just say, oh, this is an inferior road.
It's not that we don't accept it. It's that we say you're wrong. The road we're on now is not superior. You're saying that there needs to be a general dearth of organs, and people need to die for want of an organ available for them. They die on waiting lists. As opposed to the alternative where people still die like they're dying right now, but people who can afford it would be able to just buy an organ for themselves.
If you make $20,000 or $30,000 a year, which the average worker in America makes about $35,000 a year, right? So if you make that much money, you are better off in the current state of the world, because you would not be able to afford a 16 to 20 to 30 to 40,000, depending on the organ.
How do you know that?
Because of math, they wouldn't be able to afford it.
No, but how can you look into an alternative future and say, yep, prices for an organ would be as high as they are now?
I used Iran as a case study because they sell organs, remember?
Are you assuming that Iran, which is a much smaller and less developed country than the United States...
Actually, Iran... What do you think Iran's GDP is? Like top 50, top 80, top 20? Like, what do you think their GDP is?
Well, I know they're a big oil producer, and they are a big country population-wise. I'm tempted to cheat and look it up right now.
No, don't cheat. I want your inner.
I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna take.
Give me right now.
Yes.
Give me right now. 3,
okay,
2.
Hang on. If this is I want to be a millionaire, can I use one of my life?
No,
funds?
you're delaying now, so it's unacceptable. It's been too long. So.
I'm gonna say trillions of dollars. No, 750 billion GDP.
No, I don't want a number. I meant like, do you think they're like the 50th highest in GDP, 80th? What?
Yeah, I think they're in the top 50.
They're in the
25, more than 50.
They're in under 30 actually. I think they're 25th at last count.
Oh, well, all right.
They're actually quite rich, so it's okay. I mean, a lot of Americans don't know. That's why a lot of Americans want to go to war with Iran.
Well, they're still less developed than the United States, which is the phrase I use.
True, but their economy rivals America in World War II, which, like you said, took down Germany and
there weren't
Japan.
A lot of organ transplants going on in America in World War II.
I'm just saying that economy was quite robust. So I mean, they have an equivalent sized economy today.
Sure, all right, but my point here is that you are claiming that prices would not fall for freely traded organs, when with all other goods where we have robust markets, we see a general rise in quality and falling in prices.
I'm not saying that there would be zero fall in prices. I'm just saying that it would not be significant enough for the average working class American person to be able to afford them. I don't think that like we could get 5% of their
The average working class
price.
American doesn't need an organ transplant.
Well, I'm just saying when they do, now they can get one, but they wouldn't be able to in your system.
Okay, now they can get one if they get lucky.
Well, I mean, their luck is equivalent to the luck of a rich person.
What we're arguing about is the difference, right? I'm saying that in this alternative system where you can buy and sell organs, fewer people would die because there is a greater availability of organs.
Okay, so
what you're saying is that more people would die under my system compared to the current one, because the current one has a pretty equitable distribution of organs, which doesn't get to everyone, but it gets to maybe 80%. And if you're in that 20% who die, that's just kind of random luck of the draw. Rich, poor, it doesn't matter. And that's what's really important to you, is that everyone has an equal chance. Yes. Whereas I'm saying, no, I think it wouldn't be 80-20, 80% get the organ they need. It would be more like 95-5. And that 5%, yes, they would be mostly poor people, but there would be fewer and fewer of them as time goes on.
So like at the
market would, have a general decrease in prices.
At the end of the day, like it just like I think you kind of got the gist of it, which was it comes down to like ethicists and philosophers in that field saying we think that it's better for there to be more equal access to organs than it would be to get a nominal bump in organs.
Okay, and that's what I was leaping on at the beginning, which is like, on what basis can you say it's better that we have potentially more people dying? But let's just say it's a wash. Well, under my system and your system, there would be an equal number of people who fail to get the organ they need and die as a result. And in my system, it's mainly poor people who can't afford organs. And in your system, it's random luck of the draw, depending on the wait list. How is your system better than mine? How is it more moral than mine?
Well, it would be more ethical. I mean, it depends how what type of ethical person you are, what construct you use. I guess just the layperson's understanding would be if there's equal access by society, that seems to be more ethical than unequal access based on wealth. That's based just based on wealth. Based on wealth, sorry.
Okay, well, what's wrong with using wealth to get a better outcome for yourself? What's morally wrong about that?
Well, what's morally wrong about allowing equal access?
Because it denies someone who has the ability to pay a choice and says, yes, you could pay, yes, you could save your life if we allowed you to use your money, but we're going to deny you that choice and put your life in danger because of our commitment to
So
egalitarianism.
you would agree that their paying essentially allows them to skip the line of sorts, right? Like here's
And
a
I
big
don't see
line.
anything wrong with that.
Yeah, so like you would be okay with that, right? But
Yes.
when it comes to like organs and matters of life or death, it's not like Disneyland where like
All right.
I want a fast pass and I'm really trying to get. It's kind of like there's such a limited supply of these goods.
Yes,
I was
why is
right
there a
there.
limited supply? It's because we don't allow the buying and selling of organs. We have to wait for people to die in a car accident or whatever to harvest their organs. If we allowed the buying and selling of organs, people would voluntarily go like they do with sperm banks or blood donation. Well, maybe not blood donation, but people do get paid for sperm donations, right?
This idea is quite spread in clinical research. Another thing is we have an issue, and this actually might hit home even more for you. One of the reasons that 10 to 15 to 20 year timeline exists is it's so hard to enroll patients into clinical trials, and one of the reasons it's so hard is because there's the same concept of justice. We are not allowed to overpay a subject for their inclusion in a trial. So I know tomorrow, if that were to be lifted, if I could lift that cap, I know my studies could probably be done in half the time. Like right now, I'm waiting for more subjects because people just don't want to go into the clinical trial. But I know if I could just dangle 10 grand in front of them, I could immediately my trial would probably be done in the next 3-4 months. So that's not allowed currently for the same reason, because you're giving people an incentive to go on to the trial, which is that money, which is helping the drug get out there faster, which could potentially save lives. But you're doing it because you're unfairly targeting the poor, and the poor are being used to
What's
kind of
unfair about it?
they're the ones who are.
People want to be in a trial already, don't they?
They don't. They're primarily doing it. That was my contention. Is that if I just paid more, they would do it because of the money.
Oh, hang on. Are you still there?
Oh yeah. Did I cut out? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, they're primarily doing it because of the money. That's what I mean. If I was allowed to legally just go pay them more, I know that I could finish my trial in half the time for sure.
Okay, but what's wrong with that?
Like I said, it goes back to that same justice.
Faster. Those people get more money than they otherwise would have done. I'm failing to see a problem here.
Here, let me pull up the Belmont report. I think there's a whole line on it. And I'll use their wording because that might help a little bit. And I'll link you as well for sure. I have.
Maybe this would be a good segue into a more broader discussion about, is profit moral? Because I'm kind of getting a sense that you think that maybe profit is maybe not immoral in all cases, but it is immoral in certain cases.
No, I don't think profit's immoral in all cases for sure. But I think like private prisons, I think the profit incentive leads to things, the unsavory consequences that aren't easily found out until after the fact. Here, let me link you, and then I can read the justice section to you. All right, did you get the link? Let me know when you've got it open, and I'll read it for you. This is on the Health and Human Services website, hhs.gov.
Yep, I have it open from April 18th, 1970.
So you go down to Section 3, Justice. Who ought to receive the benefits of research and bear its burdens? This is a question of justice and the sense of fairness in distribution, or what is deserved. An injustice occurs when some benefit to which a person is entitled is denied without good reason, or when some burden is imposed unduly. Another way of conceiving the principle of justice is that equals ought to be treated equally. However, this statement requires explication. Who is equal and who is unequal? What considerations justify departure from equal distribution? Almost all commentators allow that distinctions based on experience, age, deprivation, competence, merit, and position do sometimes constitute criteria justifying differential treatment for certain purposes. It is necessary then to explain in what respect people should be treated equally. There are several widely accepted formulations of just ways to distribute burdens and benefits. Each formulation mentions some relevant property on the basis of which burdens and benefits should be distributed. These formulations are 1. To each person in equal share, 2. To each person according to individual need, 3. To each person according to individual effort, 4. To each person according to societal contribution, and 5. To each person according to merit. Continuing on. Oh, sorry. My page messed up.
Take your time.
Questions of justice have long been associated with social practices such as punishment, taxation, and political representation. Until recently, these questions have not generally been associated with scientific research. However, they are foreshadowed even in the earliest reflections on the ethics of research involving human subjects. For example, during the 19th and early 20th centuries, the burdens of serving as research subjects fell largely upon poor ward patients, while the benefits of improved medical care flowed primarily to private patients. Subsequently, the exploitation of unwilling prisoners as research subjects in Nazi concentration camps was condemned as particularly flagrant injustice. In this country, in the 1940s, the Tuskegee syphilis study used disadvantaged rural black men to study the untreated course of a disease that is by no means confined to that population. These subjects were deprived of demonstrably effective treatment in order not to interrupt the project long after such treatment became generally available. Against this historical background, it can be seen how conceptions of justice are relevant to research involving human subjects. For example, the selection of research subjects needs to be scrutinized in order to determine whether some classes, such as welfare patients, particularly racial and ethnic minorities, or persons confined to institutions, are being systematically selected simply because of their easy availability, their compromised position, or their manipulability, rather than for reasons directly related to the problem being studied. Finally, whenever research supported by public funds leads to development of therapeutic devices and procedures, justice demands both that these not provide advantages only to those who can afford them, and that such research should not unduly involve persons from groups unlikely to be among beneficiaries of subsequent applications of the research. So, and that's basically it. That's the modus operandi of justice in clinical research, which is that there needs to be an equal sharing of the costs and an equal allotment of the fruits. So if you give more of the fruits to the rich and less of the fruits to the poor, and you make more of the costs given to the poor and less of the costs to the rich, it is constituted as an unjust system so that's the idea behind it.
Well, okay, but that, even the language you're using to describe it, like give and give to the rich, take from the poor, is the language of a centrally planned system, where it assumes there is going to be maybe not a monopoly on handing out medical benefits and assigning burdens for medical trials, but it's going to be top-down, centralized. These people in lab coats put these people through trials, and then the same people in lab coats take the benefits and dole them out to people. And you're right, that system of justice makes sense in a centralized, centrally planned system. But I would say it's not really applicable to what I'm advocating for, because I want a decentralized, market-based system where, everything is determined by merit. And the merit
hold up. That was a big leap in logic. So you are equating wealth to merit.
No. That's exactly what my point was. Is that, obviously bad people can get rich sometimes by doing bad things. It's shouldn't be controversial. But in a market-based system, to have gotten rich must necessarily mean that you have provided for the needs of other people.
That,
And maybe
I
those
can
needs
disprove
are.
that. I can disprove that.
All right, go on then. I would love to hear this.
So, you said that in a market-based system, to have wealth implies that you have provided some, some good to society, right? Like,
right.
I shoveled these 10,000 people's lawns. They've given me money because I provided them this service, right?
Exactly.
Therefore, the wealth that I've accumulated obviously is because of that. I can show that that's not the case, and the way that I
Please
show
do.
that is estates. If I inherit an estate from a parent who was the one who did all of this work, essentially, I am completely, I guess, undeserving of it. I just got it because I happen to be the sperm and egg that left my mother's ovum, who married
Speaking
that
of
person, right?
You
So
inherited your physical body too. Does that mean that your body is forfeit? I mean, are you not entitled to your body?
wait.
You did nothing to earn your physical body. So, are you not entitled to that? Is that not justly yours?
I don't know what you're saying. That's different than a person. So person A builds wealth. Person A builds wealth.
Somebody at some point built wealth through the market system.
Yes.
Like Walton, the Walton family, right? Guy named Walton starts Walmart.
Sam Walton,
It brings goods and it brings stuff to people at a price they can afford.
Yes,
Now, maybe
yes.
you think Walmart is bad in a variety of ways, separate discussion. Point is, a lot of people nevertheless benefited from Walmart. And Walton got very, very rich. Then he died, and he handed off his enormous fortune to his 5 children, who are now some of the wealthiest people in America.
Yeah. And his
children
wife as well.
Those children having done nothing to earn that wealth does not then mean the wealth is illegitimate.
No, I never said the wealth is illegitimate. I'm just saying that wealth is unearned. So we both agree that the wealth was unearned.
No, but the wealth was earned by Sam Walton.
Yes, but we're not looking at Sam. You're moving your noun. We both agree that the wealth was earned by Sam, but let's say his son's name is Fred. We both agree that Fred did not earn it. He just got it because of circumstance and happenstance and luck. No.
The wealth he inherited is still his and is justly his.
So it's his.
The fact that he wasn't the person who earned it is immaterial.
So,
somebody did earn it, and the person who earned it chose to say, "This person shall take my wealth when I die."
So, okay, it's his per our current laws, yes. But I'm saying you could easily devise a system where anyone who dies, like, I'm not saying that this should be the case, but I'm saying you could devise a system where you would take all their wealth.
Such a thing could exist.
Yes. And then in that instance, the son would have no wealth. So the unearned wealth. Well, but why? Again, we both agreed that that's unearned wealth. Hold up. If Sam wanted his son to have it, maybe he could just give it to him while he was alive and pay the necessary taxes. Exactly.
Well, okay,
exactly.
But if I'm a father and I give money to my son, who are you, the government, to come in and steal that money?
Again, so this goes back to taxation is theft. And we had this discussion already, and we talked about how without taxation, you don't have a government. Without a government, you don't have freedom and livelihood. So I don't see how taxation is. You never proved to me that it's theft. You came up with these like
entire
20.
Proof rests on this idea that freedom can only exist in government. Government can only exist by stealing money. And I debunked that right at the beginning.
Well, you didn't,
because
you had an island.
Necessary doesn't make it not immoral.
You never.
Like I said,
we got to Sykes.
That doesn't mean it's not an act of murder.
So paperback, we got to Sykes-Picot, where the United States was carved up, and you had no answer to it. We were done.
No, I did have an answer.
No, you didn't. What was your? Okay, the United States carved up. What did you do? The United States has been carved up. How do you fight back? Yeah. You're gone.
No.
What do you do?
We have guns already.
Okay, you have guns.
We have money as well. In the absence of government, there would almost certainly be people willing to sell us bigger, more powerful weapons.
Exactly.
So on and so on.
Do you know about the Tamil tigers? Have you heard of them?
I have heard of them, yes.
Do you know what happened to the Tamil tigers?
I do not know what happened.
They are gone. They are gone. They were crushed by the government.
Are the Taliban gone?
No, look, but they could be.
No
I'm not saying that.
Sometimes people win wars, sometimes they lose. But the state can't guarantee that you're going to win a war.
Yes,
right?
well, no, but the state has a better, opportunity than like 20 to 30 ragtag people, or
Not
even
necessarily.
1,000 ragtag
The
people.
I mean, okay, the Confederate States of America had a government and they had taxation. Did they win the Civil War?
What year was that?
1861 to
What
65.
year is it now?
2020. What does it matter?
Do you know what a actually you would know because you're more of an expert probably in weapons than I am, but do you know what a force multiplier is?
Very much so, yes. I know what that is.
Do you know about asymmetrical warfare?
Quite a bit.
So would you not agree that drones being used by large governments is a method of asymmetrical warfare that a large government is able to do, which prior they couldn't do? You'd have to bring in thousands of troops, station them, feed them. But now with drones,
ISIS used drones. Did ISIS win?
No. My whole point
The
is
Syrian
that
government in the same war also had drones. They couldn't directly defeat the rebels.
yeah, and I'm not saying that having their
For
level of
every
technological
weapon, there is a
drone.
counter weapon. All right, the government has drones. There are ways of defeating drones. There are ways of counteracting drones.
Do you know how we killed Iran's second most powerful person, right?
We dropped the bomb on his head.
How was he supposed to counteract that?
Well, by not going to the Baghdadi airport to start with.
No,
I mean,
he wasn't open. Like he didn't think he wasn't untouchable, right? Like he went everywhere, and we could have killed him multiple times. Like people talk, there's been all sorts of. So, anyways, my whole point is he wasn't hiding, so to speak. But if we wanted him dead and he was in the open, there was nothing he could do, at all.
So why didn't he hide?
Because he was an untouchable. He was the second most powerful person in Iran. Like that.
Right. Well, that's my point. Is that if he'd just taken some basic precautions, and if his intel had been a little better or a little more airtight.
Do you know who Dmitry Medvedev is?
I do. Yeah, he's the president of Russia, isn't he? Or the prime minister?
Yeah, he just stepped down because of the whole constitution thing. But
right.
Dmitry is also a untouchable. Like he doesn't worry about being in public with drones because the consequences of being killed by a foreign government is quite steep. So we haven't felt all of those, but I feel like we down the line, maybe in a few more months, who knows? I feel like there could be even more repercussions to General Soleimani's death.
Let's get back to. You said, I don't have an answer for Sykes-Picot carving up the U.S. You didn't have an answer for how does the Canadian government, they've marched troops into Seattle. Now what? How do they impose Canadian laws, Canadian taxes on a group of people who don't want to be subject to Canadian authority? By
threat of force, you start with tear gas, and then
how many
rubber bullets, and then live bullets. You think by the time that a few dozen people are dead because we got to the live bullet stage that people wouldn't be subjugated? Like, you're acting like every single person in Seattle is like Rambo. Like, the vast majority of the population would be subdued.
I mean, famously, historians say that only about 3% of the American population in colonial times took part in the American War for Independence.
Again,
only 3% were actually wielding a musket.
Again, that was that. So we just talked about force multipliers. That's how we got into drones.
Okay, but
because of because of force,
but certain principles of warfare don't.
But a force multiplier is a principle of warfare. Our technology has gotten so
both ways. All right, insurgents fighting against the government can also take advantage of force multipliers. All right,
not if they're
not
if they're expensive. Right? No, not if they're expensive.
Okay. Drones can be relatively inexpensive. I mean, the FAA regulates drones. They had to because.
Do you know how much a Predator drone costs? Do you know how much a Predator drone costs?
Well, it costs a lot, but the private sector would probably make one cheaper if there was competition among drone companies. But also, let's assume the price remains stable. ISIS and Syrian rebels were able to build effective drones, sometimes weaponized, most often just for surveillance, out of commercially available parts kits for $20.
So I didn't know exactly, so I wanted to pull it up for you. A Predator drone per Wikipedia is about $4 million. And that doesn't count any Hellfire missiles or other things that would be several $1 million too. It doesn't count the satellites that you would need with the GPS to target them. I mean, it's kind of, this happens all the time with libertarians.
An insurgency doesn't need that, all right?
They don't understand that, the lay people cannot defend themselves. This is just not a thing. And you know why they can't? They could in the 1700s when these weapons didn't exist. Now they exist. The force multipliers are just too high. They overwhelm the militias.
That cuts both ways, because insurgents can get their hands on weapons which are also force multipliers against the government.
That's the thing. They can't.
Because you're thinking about the biggest, flashiest weapons, but there are other weapons which are very cheap but very effective, like truck bombs, okay? All you need to build a bomb is some diesel fuel and some fertilizer and some blasting caps.
You know, if Canada got frustrated enough, they could just bomb the place to smithereens.
Bombs
if they
cost
wanted
money.
to.
How many planes does the Canadian Air Force have? How many pilots does the Canadian Air Force have? How many bombs do the Canadians have in storage?
This is why they go with Sykes-Picot. They would only bomb and choose to annex what they could handle. So if that let's say it's just Seattle. Let's say it's just Seattle, right? And they can easily handle that, right? And they allow the rest of it to be carved up by other stage actors who've got more wealth, right? That again, at the end of the day, the people of Seattle aren't better off because they've just been bombed to smithereens. What are they supposed to do?
But the Canadians haven't been made better off either. Why is the Canadian government going to pursue this?
Because, like you said, I'm giving you the argument, and I even though I don't think I'm trying to be generous, even though I don't think that it's possible to fight this war and defend yourself successfully, I'm giving it to you, and I'm saying, let's say that they're winning, even though I don't think that they would just bomb it to smithereens. Seattle would be gone. It would be wiped off the map. And at that point, they would just bring their people in and settle it. Because, again, the whole point is because they would take the wealth, they would take the land. I don't see...
The wealth would be destroyed. They've just bombed Seattle. There's no wealth left.
I mean, land and space is wealth.
Okay, but Canada only has 38 million people. Where are all the Canadians going to come from to settle Seattle?
Vancouver?
Okay, population... Vancouver's smaller than Seattle. The metro area of Seattle has, according to... What's this? Wikipedia. 3.9 million people.
Are you saying that... So, yeah, it says here in Vancouver they have about, like, 600,000 people. Are you saying that if those people had the opportunity to get free land in Seattle that they wouldn't?
Well... some of them would, yeah, but a lot of them
wouldn't. That's it. It's over.
What if no. I mean, what if I told you there's free land in Vancouver? Are you going to uproot your life, move to a place you've never been?
Hell yeah. No joke. If you gave me a free place in Vancouver, I could have a house.
No, you're not getting a free place. You're just getting a plot of land.
Yeah, no, I would. I would still go.
There's ruins on it.
I would still go if I could get that. You know how expensive a plot of land is? Like, yes, I would. That would make me much richer. Actually, I would go. And then I would settle it, and then I would bring in contractors, and there would be this boom in the area. Right. I would totally do it. Yes.
Okay, so that would motivate Canadian government, right? But you're skipping over the pacification process. You're just assuming because the government has these shiny toys that they would be able to subjugate or just murder the population of Seattle.
I just think
I'm telling you, it's not going to be as easy as you think.
I think you're just being naive, to be honest. I just think you're not being very realistic.
No, you've not explained in detail.
You're not being realistic at all.
You demand details from me about how would anarcho-capitalists defend themselves. But then you refuse to provide any details about how the state would subjugate a population that doesn't want to be controlled.
I just did.
You just hand wave it away saying, oh, they just accept being controlled, or the government could just push a button and murder them all.
No,
you refuse to give any concrete details, but you expect the same thing from me on how a theoretical anarchist...
I just did... No, okay, so I'll say it in a more simple way. I'll say, if possible, here's X examples of how they would pacify them. And you would say, no, they wouldn't be pacified. It's not going to happen. They wouldn't be subjugated. Bullets and other stuff, that wouldn't be enough. The militia would fight back. And I was generous, and I said, I'll give you all of that, even though personally in my heart of hearts I think that's irrational and I don't think that that's what would occur. So I said, even in that instance, we could just say goodbye to it with a few Predator drones and a few missiles and then be done with it all. And then you were like, but would they really want that land? Like, would they actually want it? And then I was like, yeah, that's very valuable. Like, a plot of land in Seattle is valuable.
Some people would move, but
a lot of people would move.
You're assuming they could murder all 3.9 million people living in Seattle. if you fail to do that, those 3.9, well, the survivors of the 3.9 million, they're not going to like these Johnny-come-latelys.
How many of those survivors would be able to mount a proper defense and wouldn't leave?
They don't have to mount a proper defense. They just have to murder you in your sleep when you move there and steal their land.
How many of them would be motivated to do that? You haven't proven that that's a motivation.
A lot of them. They've just had their family brutally killed by some foreign government who's now saying you got to use the metric system. And they see, hey, my neighbor got droned and killed, and now this Canadian fucker is moving into his house. So I'm going to sneak over there in the middle of the night and murder him. That's going to happen a lot. That's exactly what happened when Israel was created. All right, you talk about Psycho.
Yeah, but you completely you overlook things like the Khmer Rouge. You overlook things like the Tamil Tigers.
What about the Khmer Rouge? Okay, what happened to the Khmer Rouge? What's your point there?
My point is that you're saying that these mass slaughters, they inevitably lead to this uprising from society and this like inability to conquer.
Mass slaughters by foreign government.
If this was true, then
the Khmer Rouge murdered their own people.
If this was true, then and annexation and taking of, if everything you're saying were true, there wouldn't be like the Mongols, how they conquered almost all of Asia. Like that wouldn't have happened.
Wait a minute now. You said earlier that that was then, this is now. The Mongols were way back when. Technology's different. That argument doesn't count by your own logic. Or would you agree that historical examples are relevant? That's
not what I said at all.
What did you say then?
I said because you're arguing that it's not... So wait, you're saying that there wasn't enough technology back then to fight back? Is that what your argument is? What's your argument?
Okay, what's your point about the Mongols?
Because your argument was that the people would be quite upset by losing their stuff, by being murdered, by being killed, and so that they would be able to mount enough of a defense that this campaign would inevitably fail. And I don't think that that's the case, and I give you all empires across the world, across history, as an example.
Okay, but empires were more... Okay, do you know anything about insurgencies and counterinsurgencies?
I do, but you act like insurgencies live indefinitely, and that's not the case at all.
But most insurgencies have actually succeeded. Most government-sponsored counterinsurgencies have failed. Not all.
Wait, most insurgencies have succeeded?
Yes.
Where did you get that from? Because that's not true.
When an insurgency is fighting against a foreign government, most insurgencies have succeeded.
Where did you get that from? That seems like your opinion.
No, all right.
That honestly just seems like your opinion. And I don't think you could back that up in any case. There's the Basque insurgency in Spain, which has gone nowhere. There were the Tamil Tigers, which has gone nowhere.
Okay, let me specify. I wasn't clear the first time.
I mean, how many?
You didn't hear me the second time. Insurgencies fought against a foreign government succeed more often than they fail.
The Basque feel like a foreign government has invaded them. They have a unique language different from the Spanish government.
Yes,
so
but historically,
the Tamil Tigers are the same way. The Tamil Tigers are the same way. They speak a completely different language, Tamil, right? They don't speak Tagalog.
But historically, the Spanish government, going back to the monarchy, has controlled the Basque.
All right, I'm gonna need you to prove that statement because I don't see anywhere near enough proof that most foreign insurgencies have succeeded. I don't know where you're getting that from.
Small Wars and Insurgencies by A.M. Rabinovich.
So, like, I would need to see some sort of statistic, basically like, hey, we listed off, like, all of the insurgencies for 300 years, and of them, this is the percentage, 58 point whatever. Like, I would need to see that level of detail. So, does the book, have they crunched those numbers? And what are they?
Let's see. Right,
like what was the time period? What was the geography?
In the 20th century.
Okay, so 20th century, and then what was the geography? Like where were these?
Foreign Affairs. You've heard of Foreign Affairs magazine, haven't you?
I actually have not.
Oh, all right. Well, it's a prestigious journal of like academics, but it's available to the public.
Because I'm primarily like in science. I spend so much time on that my eye's off the ball, I guess, with those other ones.
JSTOR, a study by the Rand Corporation. Let's see. Stephen Watts, Jason Campbell, Patrick Johnson, Samir Lalwani, and Sarah Bana. Rand Corporation study published 2014. Here you go. All right, but just from my own knowledge, I can list off quite a few counterinsurgency that tried, where a foreign government tried to subjugate a foreign country and it didn't work. France and Algeria, which is especially notable since the French had ruled Algeria for more than 100 years. France in Vietnam, the United States in Vietnam, the British in almost all their colonies. Kenya, Malaya, they actually worked. That's one of the rare exceptions. See, Kenya, they failed. India wasn't an insurgency, but there was a militant aspect to that. They failed. The Russians in Afghanistan, the United States in Afghanistan, the United States in Iraq. Are you still... Am I not just talking to myself?
Oh, no, I'm here. I'm just listening.
All right. The British in Ireland in the 1920s. That insurgency succeeded in achieving Irish independence. You could argue that the American War of Independence was an insurgency, though that one, if you want to say that was then, this
it's
is
tough
now,
to say
fine.
It's foreigners, only because, the Americans were primarily English, so... It's tough to say that it's a foreign insurgency, because the Americans were English.
Trying to project force onto another landmass.
But it was their own people. It's not like it was a foreign invader.
And about a third of the colonists didn't consider themselves English anymore. They redefined their identity as Americans.
Which might be the case, but I don't think that they would say that they weren't people, of English ancestry. Like, they wouldn't say that those people are now foreign.
Postulating. Let's not get distracted.
No, I'm not postulating. They wouldn't look at the English and think of them as foreigners.
No. I'm getting back to your original contention, which was Sykes-Picot, right? We abolish the government of the United States, and Canada decides, you know what, we're going to take over Seattle. You're telling me that Seattleites would just say, okay, we're Canadian now, and we accept that, and we redefine ourselves as Canadians.
I just think you underestimate how many insurgencies and militias have been crushed. I don't think you understand the overwhelming force
name me a few, then.
of our government.
Tell me a few.
I gave you a couple. I gave you
such as
the Tamil Tigers was an example that I gave you, and I mean, I guess you haven't looked. And do you remember? Do you remember the other one that I said, or do you not remember? Yes, and what do you know about that
we
insurgency?
quibble about whether that was a proper insurgency or not, but it was certainly, violent.
I mean, it's ongoing till today, and they keep getting crushed.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if the occasional terroristic bombing and shooting is quite the same thing as a full-blown insurgency.
And I'm not sure that Seattle, which is occasionally bombing and shooting, is a full-blown insurgency.
No, that's what I'm telling you, is that a foreign army, the Canadian army, would march into Seattle, where a bunch of people live who don't want to be Canadians and who don't want to be policed by a foreign army.
You know what's funny?
And you're just telling me, they'll be cool with that.
What's funny is
immediately begin saying, "Hey, look, we're a private company. We have means. Let's organize a collective defense for our private property. And while we're at it, we can solicit business from other nearby companies."
What's really funny is that the people in Vancouver and Seattle have more in common than the Basque do with their Spanish counterparts. So it wouldn't be as foreign. It wouldn't be as foreign even as you claim it would be. They speak English.
Okay, you've never explained in any detail how the Canadians are going to march into Seattle and then say, all of you now need to pay Canadian taxes, Canadian government. How many tax collectors...
I mean, do you want me to tell you how they put their shoes on, how they lace their...
How many tax collectors are they going to need, the Canadians? Where are those tax collectors going to come from? And how are they going to operate?
You know that they can hire people within Seattle who would, more than be willing.
The Canadian government's going to hire people in Seattle.
Why do you think... What makes you think that people in Seattle wouldn't yield to Canada and work on their behalf.
You stipulated originally that all the Americans decided, yep, let's abolish the government, that they wanted that to happen.
Yeah, and seeing that they were invaded and that there are troops everywhere and that they're being hit with tear gas and rubber bullets, they're like, you know what? I think it's better to not go on the offense here. I just think, I get that you have the courage and you have the wherewithal, and you probably would be fighting there. I don't think you understand how timid the rest of society is.
Okay, well, what about Hong Kong? Well, they're not violent, to their credit. They're just organizing mass nonviolent protests against one of the most brutal, evil governments in the world currently. And Hong Kong has a population of like 7.5 million people, and there have been some protests in Hong Kong that got 2 million people out into the streets.
Well, yeah, because their very existence is at stake.
They're in desperate circumstances, and they know it. Don't you think something like that would happen in the United States if we were invaded by
per your exact point, where's the popular? Why aren't they taking up arms? Where's the military resistance?
Because they don't have arms.
No, they could easily get arms. Why aren't they
From
taking
where?
up arms? From anywhere. The underground. Are you arguing people in Seattle couldn't get arms? They could get arms in Hong Kong.
No, Seattle already have small arms. They could improvise explosives with
and Hong Kong could obtain arms too. You're making it seem like that's impossible.
In this alternative world could obtain more powerful guns from probably other governments,
so do you know why they're not being offensive in the sense of actually taking? Do you know why they're not doing that as a strategic choice?
Well,
do you know?
The main thing, the practical one, they just can't get arms in sufficient quantities.
That's not it at all. They could. They are not taking up arms because the overwhelming force of the Chinese government would crush them and would give them reason to do so.
The Chinese could crush them right now. Why don't the Chinese do it?
Because they haven't.
What's stopping them?
Because the Chinese are not. They're not hitting up against armed rebellion. It's peaceful, like you said. It would look really bad on the.
Muslims didn't put up armed resistance. They're getting rounded up and put in concentration camps.
Exactly.
The Chinese government doesn't
why aren't they?
an excuse or justification.
Why aren't they shooting them in the streets? Why are they putting them in concentration camps? Why are they doing that?
Because they don't want to.
No, because they have to be cognizant of the world stage. They have to be careful. They can't just go around just shooting people in the street. So they put them in concentration camps.
Would that be true also of the Canadian government when they're invading Seattle in this alternative?
Because it's not the same. Because I'm trying to show you, if tomorrow Hong Kong were to take up arms and were to start a mini revolution of sorts, right? The exact response that they would get is they would bring in tanks and guns, and there would be a mini civil war essentially that happens there, right? You were saying, well, why don't they just kill people willy-nilly? Why are they putting them in concentration camps? And I was like, they're putting them in concentration camps because they start killing people.
Why are they putting them in concentration camps? I was making the point the Uyghurs haven't done anything.
Well, you know why they don't like them, right? I mean, you know why
they're Muslims.
Yeah, that's why they
communist governments hate dissenters.
Well, it's not the dissent; it's more a cultural thing. They don't like religion affects their power, right? So
the Chinese government is a bunch of racists. I'm willing to go with that.
Not just that, but I mean, from a realistic standpoint, the religion could be a threat to their power.
I mean, we're quibbling about how terrible the commies are. There's not really much to debate there. We're both in agreement. The communist Chinese are terrible.
I'm glad that me and you can call them communists. By the way, there's someone that I talked to as a side note. He doesn't consider China communist because it has some forms of private capital, which I find hilarious.
I've heard that argument as well. Two thoughts. One, if you just want to be descriptive and say, well, what is the Chinese system? It's not really communist as we understand communism, but the Chinese call themselves communist, and they are ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, so I'll just call them communists, even if actually their economic system is closer to fascism.
Well, not just that. These people are, they're doing the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? They're just being, if they're not 100% communist, therefore they're not. Because I asked them, I was like, so how much communist is communist? And they're like, no, it has to be 100%. So to me, I find that as a bit childish, because I mean, no communist country on earth would ever meet that high a bar, I would agree, and I would say, well,
even without becoming 100% purely, puritanically communist, we can still call something communist because they're attempting to get to the 100% point.
Yeah. Okay. I think we had some awesome discussions. I'm sorry, it's about 10. I've got to call it, but I want to give you any, I guess, final thoughts, words or whatnot. I really did enjoy this. It was a great discussion.
Okay. To recap, from the beginning and just wrap it all up, I would say that when it comes to debt and deficits, mandatory spending, entitlement spending is the main driver of the deficit growing year over year. That requires fundamental entitlement reform. Neither party is willing to attempt that, regardless of whether they say the solution is to cut spending or to raise taxes. Neither party is willing to have the backbone to tackle that, and so both parties are complicit in expanding deficits and piling debt. On the point of collective defense, I think that there is something to be said for, a coercive state to have a centrally planned defense. But I also think that on a smaller scale, if you've got an anarchic colony in Belize, let's say, and the Honduran government tried to invade your wealthy, prosperous, anarchic place, that you would be able to effectively defend yourself with just voluntary arrangements. And then on the point of taxation theft, taxes may be necessary to have a government, sure, but just because something is necessary doesn't make it moral. Just because you say taxes are necessary to have a government doesn't mean it's not theft. At the end of the day, the government is taking money from me without my consent, against my wishes. That's theft.
To be fair,
it doesn't make it.
I never said that it was moral. I just said that it was necessary to protect your freedom, right? Like without taxes, my freedoms cannot be protected, essentially.
Well, even if that's true, even if government is required for freedom to exist, that doesn't make taxes not theft. What makes something not theft is consent, and where consent is lacking, taxes are theft.
Well, remember, sorry to interrupt, but on that point I said...
Well, I was finished.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, like, on that point, like, if 99% of people in a society consent to something, but, like, one person doesn't, it's true that they don't consent, right? But that doesn't mean, like, the other 99% of us are going to be like, look, we all consent to this, and we all know that it enshrines our freedom. If this X person, I guess, doesn't like it, they're free to, leave, but they'd probably pretty quickly find out that, like, it's not a good idea to go it alone, so to speak.
All right, well... we could talk about immigration some other time. My last thing I'll say, promise it'll be my last thing. The smallest minority is an individual. If you violate the will or freedom of any individual, even if 99% plus one are in favor of it, it's still a violation of an individual.
Okay, I'll let you have the last word, man. Hey, it was great.
Very magnanimous. Like Bill O'Reilly. I'll give you the last word. And then he immediately says something and doesn't let the guest reply.
What's funny is, I've seen him say that and, like, not actually, like, he'll make, like, a quip. And I'm like, why are you quipping? Like, let the guy have the, like, what happened?
Yeah, you just said, give him the last word. What the hell, man?
I'll give you an example. He'd be like, all right, that was you with the last word, but, that was kind of ridiculous what you said about XYZ.
Well,
I'm like, what?
And positive note of making fun of Bill O'Reilly. And it's really sad to think that the younger kids will never know the joy that was Bill O'Reilly.
They still have Tucker. So.
Man.
I have a story for you. Last thing. So I was with Tucker at Politicon, and he asked.
Oh, you met him?
Sort of. Like, we didn't speak face to face, but, like, he saw me and he asked the question to, like, the audience, like, without a shared sense of culture, like, what binds us all together in America? And I was there, and I was like, the Constitution. And a lot of people laughed from behind me, and later on he said the same thing, made the same argument, and I yelled again, like, the Constitution. Like, that's kind of like what, in my opinion, binds us together as Americans. And he quite didn't like that. He was quite upset. No one had ever said that to him, and so he, if you notice, has not been saying that as often anymore.
Yeah, well, the state of conservative politics would be an interesting discussion some other time, but I had a really great time. I appreciate you doing this. I'm a man of my word. took you on. I think we had a good exchange. You made some good points. I'll reconsider some things. I hope I did the same.
Yep.
I'll leave that to the audience to decide.
Yep, and we'll definitely talk again, Paper Rack. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn off the
That was
stream
fun.
right now. All right, thanks,
All right.
dude. Bye.